By the newly built water wheel, a crowd of onlookers can't stop gawking, and a brown-haired man says this is just the opening act, while a young blonde woman, standing beside a well-dressed blonde man, stares in disbelief at what's unfolding. Over on her own, a red-haired girl clutches back tears and can't help questioning what kind of boy could possibly be doing this. The kid in question, a bright-eyed blonde with a book tucked in his arms, breaks into a smile that screams certainty, and in that quiet moment he swears with rock-solid resolve that this time everything will finally be different. It's as clear as day, no doubt about it, and once he's decided, he'll rip through everything and save his family. The story snaps back to a brutal old memory, year 513 of the care calendar. An eye-patched elderly commander steps forward and declares the execution will begin. Baron Solis Takar, the ex-lord of the Estel territory. He even spits out that this killing is being carried out with the Baron's own agreement. And down on the platform's edge, the young Baron just drops his head in defeat, blood seeping from his lips as the towing bells start to ring. Pinned to a stake in the middle of the town square, every inch of him screamed with pain. Then he finally snapped to it. The voice was Reese, the commander, and as the speech rolled on, horror dawned and he realized they weren't announcing anything. They were talking about killing him. Staring down a hostile crowd, he feels their anger throb in the air, like one wrong move could spark a stone flying. With a heavy heart, he swallows their resentment, certain he can't really blame them. His mind drifts back to the way things used to be. His land was once a miracle, a lush, thriving place with an incredible lord, all because his parents poured years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice into it. Then disaster slammed into his life. Raging floods, a brutal war, and a deadly epidemic that tore through his family, even wiping out their house steward, and it didn't stop there. His older brother, the celebrated warrior everyone was counting on, was brought down too. The only one left was a young man with nothing to his name, and he could feel the commoners, resentment burning in the air, whispers calling him a useless lord with no real power, over and over. Then the calamities never stopped. Famine crushed them until they finally collapsed, and a neighboring country swept in with a full-scale invasion. With defeat staring them in the face, he swallowed his pride and chose the one last move, strike a trade. He offered up his own life, plus the few coins he'd managed to save, to spare his people and their land. That sacrifice was how he sealed his reign as their lord. He shut his eyes and braced for whatever came next, because if he gave in now, maybe his people could get their lives back and finally breathe in peace. With one last tired exhale, he struck the match and lit the flames. Through the roaring flames, a voice screamed his name, Anne. She shoved through the chaos like a lifeline, her hood hiding a face full of desperation, and when he saw her, relief crashed over him. She'd escaped the earlier attack alive. Her frantic sprint got snuffed out instantly. One huge, splintered beam from the collapsing structure crashed down on her with brutal force before she could get anywhere near it. His voice came out as a low, trembling murmur of despair over all that chaos, and he scolded her gently, telling her she never should have done that. Fear flooded his face as he stared at her crumpled form, shouting for her to back away from the danger, from the ground. Then he looked up to see her, bloodied but unbroken, and he thanked him for the work he'd given her and her brother in the Solis household. Sorrow slammed into his expression as he stared at the wreckage, and her words landed. He only managed a bitter, single line of pain. He knew the truth, and he had it all figured out. With what little strength she had left, she lunged forward and clamped onto his hand with a death grip, while her tears streamed down, swearing that no matter what anyone else claimed about him, she'd always known he truly cared for his people. Hands clasped in a last prayer-like plea as she crumpled among the wreckage, trapped in the shadow of those motionless onlookers' legs. The crowd split wide open, and a noble woman with flowing blonde hair glided through the chaos with calm, fearless steps straight toward the chaos-brewing scene. She paused with a heavy, somber look, then wiped a trembling tear from the corner of her eye as the tragedy closed in on her. She wept openly, tears pouring down her face, while a dark-haired woman beside her joined in, both grieving his selfless deeds, the way he toiled without rest for his people, suffered calamities and nasty living conditions right along with them, and even gambled with his own life in the middle of an epidemic, all to honor the fallen land he refused to abandon. Bound and beaten, the young man, still facing his execution, stared at them and breathed their names: Miss Allie, Rose Sane, Claire Sane, whispering like a prayer that even now in his final moments, he was grateful they hadn't stopped believing. A tired little smile flickered across his lips, like he couldn't believe it either, and he swore it felt weird to be happy in a moment like this, until the truth hit him. He never knew he was this popular, not when women as stunning as these were all over him. Then his eyes snapped past them, and his shock hit like a wave. This wasn't just two people staring at him. A huge crowd of his subjects packed in, hands clasped tight as they prayed for his salvation, and he could barely whisper, "Everyone," in utter disbelief. In that instant, a blinding blast of light exploded around him. He choked and coughed as smoke clawed into his lungs, stealing his sight. And when he finally understood this was the end, he shut his eyes, clinging to one last silent apology. "Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry that as your Lord this is all I can do, but—" As his life drained away, a brutal realization slammed into him. Everything he needed to trigger a skill was finally in place. He'd been gifted bloodline magic, space-time magic, and even a territory appraisal skill, and the timing was so impossible it left him stunned. He screamed, choking on silent frustration because that Lord's skill, ignited by his subjects' faith to bless his territory, was finally ripping into the world. And he knew it wouldn't save him. It was useless. He didn't need it. And with that last despairing thought, his life, as the leased car, came to a sudden, horrifying end. Then it hit, awareness snapped into place as an old record stamped Dakar's birth. The Baron Soli's family's second son in 493. But when he tried to move, his body wouldn't listen, until he stared down at a little arm that was his, and the terrifying realization landed like a punch. He'd been reborn as a baby. His mind jolted back to the execution, eyes blazing as he desperately tried to fire his bloodline magic. A message hit him. His authority had activated. Then, with space-time magic, his skills and every scrap of knowledge got stitched into the history of Baron Solis, and his soul would be shoved into that record as a brand-new vessel. The truth snapped into focus. Watching from his own tiny body, he saw the outline of his old life fading in the distance, knew he was about to be reborn, and swore he'd start this time with bloodline magic already in his veins. He lifted a finger and froze, staring at this wild, brand-new beginning. He clutched the heavy tome of his family's history, and it hit him like lightning. He actually did it. The prayers of his people, whispered at the end of their lives, had finally paid off, handing him a second chance. Relief hit him so hard his tiny body took over. Out came a loud, undignified wail, tears pouring down his face. He cringed at the embarrassment, but gratitude slammed in right behind it, because now he'd finally get to see everyone's faces again. His screams finally got answered by the gentlest touch. A woman with long blonde hair scooped him up and held him close, her voice soft as she asked what hurt. He looked up and froze, because he knew her the moment he saw her, his mother. She smiled like she'd cracked the code, assuming his tears meant hunger, and promised him food. Then, as she pulled him close, a brutal memory hit him from his past life. His mother, just about 19, knew him too well, because he was fated to die from an epidemic at only 35. The word food hit him like a nightmare, an infant's fear, a mind snapping into panic like a 50-year-old choking back reality. Then he tried in his own head to scream that this was all wrong, that he wasn't who he looked like. His silent struggle went completely ignored. His mom just tilted her head and asked, all sweet concern, if he wasn't hungry, and he desperately wanted to yell that hunger wasn't the problem at all. His furious screams ricocheted through the room, then boomed across the entire family estate like thunder. In the end, he couldn't beat the baby's instincts. His feeding went on, but a strange wave of guilt crashed over him, and suddenly he couldn't stop asking why he'd been so worked up just moments ago. A thought snapped him out of his own earlier ramble. No, he wasn't some guy in his 50s, not even close. Then a memory hit like a lightning bolt. His younger self, exhausted, tied up. He'd been executed at just 20. With that brutal realization, unease crawled under his skin. His vision erupted into broken snapshots. A pair of legs beside a desk, a paper stamped leave of absence, a cold, empty room, and then a crowd of faces. And the moment he stared wide-eyed, that crushing feeling of something's missing hit him so hard he couldn't even process what he was seeing. His head spun with ruthless, scrambled memories from someone else's life. Grief struck at a hospital bed, a construction worker on the phone getting hit with devastating news, and the brutal snap of a car windshield shattering to pieces. From the shadows of his newborn mind, one sharp thought blasted through the haze like a spotlight. He remembered it all, every last detail of Nishida Takahiro's life, the you right before this one, and he felt that same crushing anguish the moment everything finally started going right before it was ripped away from him. That recovered past hit like a punch, new tears burst free. He broke down in full sobs, crushed by the wife he'd left behind, because with no kids and no other family, she was truly alone. His sobs got cut off when a gentle voice broke through, and his new mother reached out, whispering to her little car not to cry. She yanked him into a tight, warm hug and swore she was right there. He lifted his eyes, and his little infant brain immediately cried out for his mother as he finally settled in her arms, another voice slipped in his father's. He gazed down with a soft smile and told him, "Stop the crying, kid, it's a total waste of your good looks." His baby eyes went wide with sudden recognition. One word snapped into his mind: father. Just when he finally caught a breather, Derek, his older brother, suddenly pounced and yanked his cheeks wide in a playful stretch. His father shot out an exasperated, "Stop, Derek." That loud interruption hit perfectly. Derek snapped his gaze to his little baby brother, grinning as he blurted that the crying had finally stopped. He grins so wide it lights up the room, soaking in every warm, loving moment with his brand new family. That deep, unstoppable joy comes from every precious second. His mom holding him close, his dad watching over them, and Derek, his older brother, laughing and playing right there beside them. But then a dark premonition crashes through his joy. He already knows this family's tragic end is waiting for them, and that chilling question won't let go. Is he doomed to survive all that pain and despair again and lose everything once more? His face tightens with pure resolve. No way he's letting that happen, not ever. He's determined to stop the same heartbreaking fate that crushed the Baron's family in his past life. He suddenly realizes he's sitting on two unbeatable weapons: the hard-earned historical know-how he gained as Baron Solis Takar, and the sharp modern insight from his life as Nishida. So he swears he'll rewrite history, using every last bit of his authority and even his time-space transfer power to save his family. This hunger for change gets turbocharged by the promises he made in his past. He remembers his life as Nishida Takahiro and swears he'll forge a brand new future right alongside his wife, Yuko. With his goals locked in, he gets ruthlessly determined, daydreaming about this brand new future, fully aware he's just a baby right now. His power is limited to what he can babble, but he's confident he can still map out a real plan. Time keeps rolling. In the year 496 of the Care calendar, Takar is finally 3, and his mother catches him reading and freezes in pure shock because he only just learned to talk. She tells him she's put in the work and asks him to be a good boy, and he happily snaps back with a cheerful, "You got it." Once he'd mastered reading and writing, he devoured books like they were oxygen, and that newfound freedom let him stare at the world around him with sharper, clearer eyes. By watching everything around him, he sizes up the world. This civilization feels like medieval Europe, right before the Industrial Revolution even hits. He clocks his own home, too. The Estel territory, a frontier land ruled by his family, the Baron Solis. Sure, there's plenty of untouched wilderness, but it sprawls on, and it's packed with fertile potential. He scanned his surroundings, and the family mansion, though not exactly classy, still hit him like something out of a classic fantasy story. In this world, magic wasn't a myth, it was real, and the nobles wielded it like a crown, demanding awe and obedience wherever they went. Their power as feudal lords was locked in two things: cold authority and a bloodline that proved they belonged. Back when the barony of Solis was carved into the world through divine authority, his own reincarnation happened straight because of a bloodline match. He decided to tap into every last clue, Baron Solis' memories, what he'd learned from his other lives, and the books he'd devoured. Then he piled it all into a single plan and started sorting it by the 5 great calamities. His face twisted at the thought, because his family had been crushed by one devastating tragedy after another, and it was a history that felt almost impossible to face. His razor focus shattered when his toddler body slipped and he went tumbling down, and he blurted out, panicked, how they were even supposed to shield themselves from the weather and outside threats. But his mother and the maids couldn't stop squealing, calling his awkward flop adorable, because that tiny size was just too cute to handle. Even with all those interruptions, he knew he had to scout the neighboring empire, starting with the flood that hit in 501, then the Estel territory getting invaded by the so-called invincible General Weiss, a man no one truly knew. Now he had just 5 years left, and he had to build a plan. 2 years vanished in a blink. Then Takara turned 5, and panic crashed over him like thunder. He'd convinced himself he had time, but 5 years of his new life had already slammed past. Trapped in a maze of books, a wave of nausea slammed him, and he knew he had to rein it in, breathe, calm down, and make sense of it all. Then he glanced at the calendar again, and there it was, the year 498. He dove back into his research, tearing through old records, because the books showed a huge harvest in 498 that somehow wrecked the economy by slamming grain prices. Then came a brutal crop failure, and after that, the pressure only grew as neighboring lords started circling in. The records didn't just paint a bad day, they screamed disaster. A surplus harvest in 499, a volcanic eruption that choked the land into drought in 500, a war with neighboring lords in 501 that got his older brother killed, a bloody, expensive fight against an invading country in 502, and then a flood that wrecked everything in 503. So many calamities hit at once that he slammed the book shut in pure rage, snapping. Who in their right mind thought there was still time left? His sudden outburst crashed into cold, grim thinking. He named the disasters from his past life like a checklist of 5. A bumper harvest, a failed harvest, a land dispute, the scars of war, and then the flood. And he knew the hard truth. If he tried to gear up for all 5 at once, his supplies would get wiped out long before that last, world-breaking flood finally hit. Realizing he couldn't juggle everything at once, he decided to zero in on what he could actually control. Then he marched up to his mother while she worked at her desk, cut in with a quick apology, and said he needed something. She looked up from her papers, quill poised, and asked him kindly what was on his mind. She shoved her work aside, dropped to her knees in front of him, and smiled like she could finally prove she was someone he could trust. He studied her, seeing that sharp, focused version of herself for the first time, different from her usual vibe, but somehow even more powerful. Then he clasped his hands and started laying out the favor he needed. He admitted his project wasn't going the way he'd hoped, and when he heard about the incredible craftsmen in Estel, he begged to meet them in person. Then his mom just beamed at him with that warm, encouraging smile and giggled. "Aw, you're so cute, my boy." He pushed his claim hard, formally begging permission to slip out of the estate and tour the workshops, and it stung. He hated that he had to play games, but the need to stop what was coming left him no choice. Relief hit him hard. His mother immediately agreed and told him to hand all the preparations to her. Then a few days later his permission finally came, but with 2 brutal conditions. His father loomed beside her, barking that he had to act like a proper noble, and the boy shot back immediately that he would. Right as the second condition hit, a hooded maid suddenly came sprinting at him, screaming his name like it was an emergency, her eyes blazing wide while she swore she knew everything. And the maid assigned as his escort stood right in front of him, hands clasped tight, eyes set with unwavering resolve. In the massive city of Est, the biggest in the Estel territory, sitting at the southern edge of the Care Kingdom, crowds packed the streets. Young Cyrus Dakar, with his maid right beside him, leans in with eyes blazing as he stares out over the roaring plaza, all of it ringed by towering walls and centered near the Lord's mansion, where Cyrus calls home. As they strode through the buzzing market, Cyrus leaned in and said this town's way of doing things is way better now. Because this city kicks off the whole supply chain for the region, with prosperity fueled by mining, trade, and agriculture. Their eyes lock onto a food stall as huge sausages sizzle on the grill, and Cyrus blurts out how insanely good they look, drool and all, while he, still chewing the moment over, addresses him as to Carson. He whips his gaze to his silent companion, spots her reaction, then asks, "What's wrong?" and tells her to come eat with him. Deep in the virus, it keeps flashing back to that commoner blood from Nishida's past life, and it boils with excitement, remembering how damn good of an eater he used to be. Right there at the stall, the elderly couple spots the young master from the Baron's house digging into their food, and they instantly treat that as a fresh selling point. He blurts out an apology for catching them off guard, says it's time to go. Then, the second they walk off, a hungry crowd surges into the stall and customers rush in to snatch up everything the young master had. Cyrus can't help but cringe at how awkward this all feels, because he remembers she's the daughter of the Soli's house head maid. Her thoughts tore deeper into her past. She'd been trained like a blade from childhood, getting a strict maid education and proving she was scary good at martial arts too. And with a commander father from the standing army drilling her in self-defense, until even an ordinary soldier couldn't survive her sword fight. She worked as a maid and a bodyguard, and she was damn perfect. Just the other day, at 15, she finally went from apprentice to his personal maid, and now, as he watches her in the present, a terrifying memory slams back in. This very plaza is where he last saw her, right before his execution in his second life. He digs deeper into that old past, first as Derek's personal maid and bodyguard, always watching the 2 of them spar in the courtyard, both razor-sharp with swords. And then 3 years later, when Derek's life is cut short on the Cross of Trail, Cyrus has only one choice. After his brother's death, he's assigned to serve him. He looked back, right back to when he was 30, and she was already stepping into her mother's role as head after her mother died of the same cause. She'd lost 2 people, then had to raise one more right after the other, and the grief crushed her until she sank into despair. Her voice snapped him out of his head and demanded to know what was wrong, and when he jerked in surprise, he brushed it off fast, saying it was nothing, telling her they should go, and she just nodded and agreed. As they kept moving, his eyes locked on her. There beside him stood the dignified, quiet, gorgeous red-haired maid. He finally admitted to himself that from the moment she first started serving him, they just didn't click. Every time he slipped up and acted less than noble, she cut him down with a calm, razor-sharp tongue, and that whole tense rhythm was hard for him to put into words. He remembered her telling him that even if he didn't live up to the noble image, the people of the territory still looked at him with warm eyes because he was so easy to talk to. Realizing his own messed-up behavior, he caught himself calling her Ice Lady, then offered a quiet, silent apology for that stupid nickname. She trusted her, sure, but she still made him feel a little outmatched, so he decided right there to act like an angel at the workshop. And honestly, he was sure his parents would have done the exact same thing if they were watching. When they finally rolled up to the place, the workshop manager, Geld, was already waiting. Big, muscular, arms crossed, cutting them off with a hard, no-nonsense snap that this wasn't a place for the young master from a noble family, and Cyrus stared up at his towering presence, caught off guard. The manager's cold, stern stare didn't scare him one bit. Cyrus grinned, introduced himself as Takar, and told them he was only there to learn, not start trouble, and Geld, shocked by the attitude, finally caved, letting them roam as long as they stayed out of the way, while Cyrus privately thought Geld totally sounded like the kind of guy his wife at home could run like clockwork. The moment they stepped inside, a sharp snip echoed through the air. Then a craftsman erupted, yelling at his apprentice that the piece was trash, demanding a full redo, and swearing it couldn't go to any customer. Cyrus and Anne both froze at the sudden fury. He flashed a bright grin, waved off the tense workshop like it was nothing, and told her everything would be fine, even as his maid stared in confusion, while deep down, he admitted the hostile air couldn't touch him at all. That calm he wore like armor came from a past life spent choking in a toxic company. He still remembered a manager screaming, "The answer is always yes," and even though it disgusted him, he'd somehow gotten used to it. The very next day, Geld, the workshop manager, watched Cyrus come back, and his eyes narrowed as the boy strolled in with zero fear, leaving Geld wondering what kind of young master could stay so stone-calm in a place this intimidating. Cyrus practically stared in shock as the boy came back, meaning his tough guardian finally gave the go-ahead, while she glanced over at him in her own way, calling her the Ice Lady in his head, even though that icy attitude was just her protecting him. Across the workshop, the senior craftsman snarled at his blindfolded apprentice, shouting that the moment still wasn't made for interruptions, but he'd never quit on the work. Cyrus brushed off the outburst, strode up to the senior craftsman, and demanded to know which timbers were hardwood, only for the man, buried in his work, to snap that his hands were full and Cyrus would have to wait. While the craftsman dodged the question, his apprentice marched right by, firing off a blunt reminder. Delivery day was tomorrow fast, and asking what they were going to do next. Far off, Geld clocked the whole tense exchange and kept watching. Geld's face tightened with concern, then shifted into deep thought as he watched Cyrus bark orders to his men. Something clicked in his eyes. Just when Cyrus thought the world might move on without him, the older craftsman finally called out, "Young master," and Cyrus shot back, "Yes." Right before the craftsman could move on, Geld shoved forward and locked eyes with the boy, then asked straight up if Cyrus wanted to learn woodworking. Cyrus clenched his fist because he could keep up the act, but that blunt question forced a real answer. He makes it clear he's here for more than curiosity. There's something burning in him that he has to build no matter what blocks the way. If he fails, he can't reach them. Gel press is next. He asks whether his creation can only be brought to life through woodwork with. The boy doesn't hesitate for a second. He shoots back one loud, confident answer, "Yes." The moment the response hit, it snagged Geldorf's guard, and his face snapped from calm to total shock. After a brief pause, the workshop manager studies the boy's conviction, then just says, "I see." And from that day on, Cyrus starts showing up at the workshop almost every single day, like he's become part of the place. With each visit, he slowly won Cyrus's trust, now the man he called boss. Cyrus greeted him like a firecracker, all youthful energy and zero interference, while Gel just grunted to the young master, cutting him off like, yeah, keep moving." Even with that weird little awkwardness from being stuck with a kid's mind, he still warmed up to the other craftsmen who treated him kindly, until he finally decided, "All right, it's time. I'm showing them the project I've been picturing." He laid out the plans and shoved them in front of Geld, and the moment Geld saw them, his face twisted with pure confusion. He stared at the paper like it made no sense at all, then demanded what on earth it was even supposed to be. The other craftsmen were just as baffled. One kept asking how they were supposed to carve a perfect round shape like the drawing, and the next one worried they didn't even have wood strong enough to survive the job without rotting away. Cyrus watched their faces, grimly admitting his own attempt to make it had crashed and burned, and that's exactly why he handed them the design. After sizing up the challenge, Gel shouted for a craftsman named Carl and told Cyrus that even though Dakar was still young, his spark was already there, and Carl could be the one to help. Then the dark-haired craftsman strode forward, reached out, and introduced himself to young Master Dakar like they were sealing a deal. He gripped the young master's hand like a vow, sealing their brand-new partnership on the spot. As Cyrus strode away, his parents stayed in the doorway, his mom clocking that he never usually asked for anything, while his dad just shrugged and muttered that they'd better let him run wild, especially with how often he'd been showing up at the workshop lately. Then the grind kicked off. 3 straight months, Cyrus kept showing up at the workshop like clockwork, teaming up with Carl and tweaking every detail until the final design was locked in. A masterpiece so intricate it could never be brushed off as some kid's toy. A few days later, the moment finally hit. Cyrus had to unveil his finished model to everyone out in the courtyard, and the pressure in his chest spiked. He cleared his throat, tried to thank his parents for their help, but the words choked up, because there, right in front of him, was a man he absolutely didn't expect to see. He hesitated, staring at the surprised guest, the man standing beside his parents, and then politely asked the Karsama for permission to hear the offer and join in. Cyrus clocked him the second he appeared, Raymond, the house steward who ran the estate's day-to-day life and kept everything in order. Raymond wasn't just good. He was one of the best in the entire household, second only to Cyrus' own parents. He'd even served Cyrus, mother before she ever married, and his talent showed in everything he did. Still, the moment Raymond was in front of him, Cyrus couldn't ignore it. He'd never really liked the man because being near him always felt like pressure tightening around his chest. He flashed back to his old life, how he'd pitch ideas to his parents, only for Raymond to nitpick them over and over. Every time that happened, Cyrus would choke on his words, and it felt like his heart was about to crack. Sure, Raymond eventually swallowed his proposals and even used them in the household, but every win left him drained. Even with all his own feelings getting in the way, Cyrus had to swallow his pride and admit it. Raymond was a breath of fresh air. Sharp, capable, and the kind of guy who actually listened to his master's orders. He had that instant popular look too, down to the mole under his eye. And the wild part? The maids practically adored him. Cyrus couldn't remember ever being that admired himself. He slumped down and groaned under his breath, and the thought hit him. Maybe his beef with the steward wasn't all hate, maybe it was jealousy because everyone loved him. But the second he faced Raymond, he shoved those feelings down. Sure, inferiority clawed at him. But he also knew, no question, that Raymond was someone he could trust, because in the end, it all came down to what was in his heart. With his resolve ironclad, he turned to the group and declared he'd start and call foreign. Right from the side, she snapped back, yes, instantly, already geared up to jump in and help. He sweeps his hand grandly over the gears and levers, kicking off his presentation with full ceremony, and as he talks his eyes lock in, his mind sprinting as he realizes how massive this moment really is. If he's going to bend history, he needs Raymond in his corner, no questions. That hit lands like a punch. Now his mind is made up. He won't just show his project. He's going to win the steward over and turn him into an ally, starting right from this very instant. Ever since he was a kid, that maid had him staring at her with a shaky, scared kind of caution, like he didn't trust a single blink. And the way he talked. It was weird, too, like he was deliberately acting clumsy, a calculated performance that never once felt charming. Strangely enough, no matter what, he always clicked with everyone around him, townspeople and even the shrewd merchants who came to the mansion for business, until they all became his loyal, hard-earned allies. Curiosity about him burned brighter and brighter, so she swapped her plans, picking the apprentice she'd originally meant for Derek and sending him to Takar instead, and ordered that apprentice to send her daily updates on the young master's every move. Meanwhile, the steward Raymond watched from his window, stunned as Takar built something he'd never even imagined. And now the mad genius was standing over every detail, overseeing the whole creation like it was his lifeline. His eyes snapped sharper with a mind-blowing realization. Whatever was being built down below could even save their whole territory. In the workshop, Takar stood watch as the device crouched and pored over every wooden and metal piece. Takar's finished invention was handed to his parents, and his father just froze, stunned by its huge size, while his mother beside him could only gasp one word: amazing. With his mom's silent question hanging in the air, Takar grinned like he'd just struck gold. then blurted out that he'd built *2 *** devices. He pointed to one and said it was a lifting water wheel **, and to the other and called it a *** powering water wheel **. His mother leaned in, repeating *** water wheel with pure curiosity. He kicked off his explanation by diving into the lifting water wheel, an enormous wheel fitted with rows of rectangular buckets that scooped up water and hauled it up. As Takara kept going, he broke down the whole trick step by step. He shoved the wheel into the flowing current, and that stream forced it to spin. Then every rotation scooped up water and dumped it into a spot farther and higher than where it started, while his mother leaned in, listening hard and nodding like she finally got it. It breaks down how this water wheel churns the same way, powered by the water's push. Then hits the real twist. A rod tied to the wheel's axle bounces up and down, and a gear on the wheel snaps into one on the ground, turning the wheel's spin into straight-up horizontal motion. His mother is completely blown away, staring at him like, "What am I even supposed to do with someone this incredible?" His father stays baffled, like he's watching a living science experiment. And over by the side, the steward, Raymond, clocks everything, thinking the mother's spoiling Cyrus way too much, and that the father's ideas are stuck in the past. With one last burst of certainty, he insists it's a lifting water wheel, built to haul water up to a higher level than the river ever reaches on its own. It hits his mother like a lightning strike. This device could finally send water to those dead, barren lands that have been stuck dry because they've never had a way to reach them. He keeps the demonstration going, showing how the water wheel can be tuned to automate the brutal work that used to be done by hand, until his parents and the steward finally get it. This isn't some kid's toy anymore. The whole invention matters because Estel's defenses have one glaring weak spot. The territory's granaries are crammed into a single zone, and if that one area gets wiped out, the economic fallout would be catastrophic, with production and automation suddenly turning from progress into a disaster. That hits Raymond, the steward, like a thunderclap, because it feels like Cyrus already knows one of the territory's biggest problems. So Raymond presses him, straight out, asking where he learned it. Cyrus just grins and says he found it in a book about other kingdoms. He keeps going, saying he truly believes this could spark growth back in their own territory. And that heartfelt promise hits Raymond so hard a tear starts to well up as he stares at the boy. Raymond's view of the boy flips overnight. This isn't some kid's curiosity or a game for fun. Cyrus knows exactly what's coming, and he's fighting tooth and nail to dodge every danger in their path. And somehow, while everyone else misses it, young Takar's carrying a crushing burden on his shoulders. At least, that's exactly how it looks in the dance. The steward, Raymond, hardened his resolve. Cyrus was still a kid, and there were only so many battles he could win alone. Sooner or later, other adults would scoff and dismiss him, so Raymond chose to back the young master quietly from the shadows, ready whenever he was needed. Right as he opened his mouth, Cyrus snapped his gaze to him, eyes wide with shock, and demanded, "So, what's going on here?" He paused for a heartbeat, then a huge, bright smile burst across his face with pure relief. He practically poured out his gratitude to Raymond. Then Cyrus clapped down the plan. "Let's move," and still, he ran a meticulous safety review and cranked up production because everyone could feel it coming. They were about to get slammed with work. Raymond just flashed a smile and answered Karsama with a calm, confident yes. With Raymond's strong backing them, the project kicked into overdrive. Work started the very next day as they stormed into the installation site, and before long a colossal order for water wheels hit the workshop, with deliveries rolling in back-to-back just a few months later. The whole family was thrown into it. His mom and Raymond were busy forging the land and irrigation plans. His dad pushed hard to snatch up the new business chance by hunting buyers for the surplus ahead of time, and even his younger sister was firing on all cylinders, helping with the paperwork. He viewed their push like an arrow yanked from a bowstring, one that could rewrite history, and with that fire in his chest, he hardened his resolve to beat the 5 calamities he'd seen coming. Time dragged on, and then, boom, the great harvest finally arrived. Cyrus sat at a lavish table, eyes locked on his food, jaw set with unshakable grit, because deep down he knew he wasn't going to lose. He barked at the top of his lungs, face buried in his food, swearing he'd never be crushed by some measly family. The moment the water well presentation ended, the land development and irrigation push kicked into high gear, and it started paying off fast. They even began building milling facilities to tap the power from that well, but Cyrus knew one last, make-or-break job had to be done before they could truly lock in the harvest. He realized the barley harvest Barney pulled off, one that sent grain prices crashing, was his chance to strike gold, so he didn't just plan for the next bad harvest. He hoarded like crazy, built a massive stash of low-priced grain, and set himself up for the disasters he saw coming, aiming to buy low and sell high. To do that, he knew he'd need a legit reason to buy that huge stash of wheat, and he realized he'd have to launch a brand new product to hit the market. He tinkered with a wheatan dried noodle preserved food, dreaming up something that could sit for ages and be ready in seconds. Just add hot water and it's done. With that plan burning in his mind, he dashed into the Baron Soli's house kitchen, leaned around the corner and beamed at the head chef, Miguel San. The big, muscular guy snapped his attention away from the pot, still stirring it, and greeted the boy like he'd been expecting him, asking if he was back again. Miguel was a former soldier who'd fought beside Cyrus, father in the army, and even when the battlefield ran dry, he still somehow cooked up mouth-watering meals. Then when he got wounded, he accepted the Baron's offer and stepped into the role of head chef. The chef clicked with the Baron and treated Cyrus like family, then leaned in and asked what the boy wanted today. So Cyrus confessed he was trying to save something, and he unveiled his prototype noodles. Miguel snatched one, nailed the recipe on the spot: water, flour, and salt. Then went on to point out how they'd been kneaded, rolled, and dried, and Cyrus nodded hard, saying it mattered because they were about to knead a whole mountain of wheat flour. With one noodle held up, Cyrus' face turned deadly serious, and he said, straight out, that if this worked, it might even help on the battlefield. Miguel's attention snapped to him instantly, and the ex-soldier's eyes widened at what that really meant. At 5 years old, Cyrus learned the hard way that knowing the past and future tech wasn't enough to make history budge. He couldn't build a water wheel by himself, so he had to pull in real experts to get it done. Then Cyrus and Miguel plunged into weeks of brutal trial and error, testing every technique they could, tweaking the salt and wrestling with drying methods until nothing was left but failure. Each busted batch still had to be eaten because his father's warning rang in his head. Don't waste a single ingredient. After what felt like a million tries, he finally cracked the recipe, and the moment he tasted it, his face lit up with relief and he just couldn't help but say, "It's good." He nailed the recipe just before the great harvest, and a rush of relief and pure triumph crashed through him as he silently thanked Miguel for saving the day. He sat with his family, chewing on his new creation, and when he realized the noodles were a hit, it hit him. Something tasted wrong. In this landlocked kingdom, the real problem was the basics. Good soup stock ingredients were scarce, and staples like soy sauce or miso just didn't exist. As he stared at his younger sister, his mother, and even his father, he watched their eyes light up. They all couldn't wait to try it. Their simple requests lit the fuse in his head. Then it hit him. He needed one more key ingredient, a selling point so irresistible it would snag his father's attention too. A bolt of inspiration flashed across his mind, and it felt like it came with a fresh grit flared in his eyes, and he wasted no time, grabbing his tools and diving in at once, ready to slam his next idea into life. The real solution was a brand new product, cup noodles served in bamboo containers, and somehow that bamboo was easy to get, because a huge bamboo forest grew south of the Estel territory right on the Demon Realm border, and people kept chopping it down all the time since they swore it fueled monster nests, leaving demand low and supply overflowing. So its creepy reputation made it the perfect resource nobody bothered to notice for cooking and storage. He simply grabbed a bamboo section, carved it hollow, packed it with dried noodles, then poured in water with a splash of Miguel's special seasonings and set it over the fire, until that fragrant, mouth-watering soup filled the air, and the whole thing instantly reminded him of drawing a paper fortune. But even after he nailed the cup noodles, frustration crashed over him. He cursed a stupid little mistake that shoved him into needing Miguel's help, even though his plan had been flawless up until then. He swept his eyes across the finished bamboo cups, and confidence surged back in his chest. This was his selling point. Now he planned to hand his father these omikaji dried noodles as a fresh product and a handy stash for disaster. Sure, his dad would be blown away as he picked one up to admire it. Then clatter, something inside went off and his gut tightened. Something was seriously wrong. It was all moldy. Then it hit him like a punch to the gut. The culprit was the moisture trapped inside those freshly cut green bamboo shoots. Dried bamboo would have been perfect for holding the noodles, but grabbing it was way harder and way pricier than the green stuff, and he'd had the green kind sitting right there. For months, he clenched that crushing disappointment, racking his brain for an answer that felt totally out of reach, even wishing real material, like styrofoam, would just drop from the sky, until the year of the great harvest finally exploded into existence, kicking off the prophesied 5 calamities too. Out in the open fields, wheat shot up tall and golden beneath a spotless sky, and the local farmers, totally blind to what was coming, stared at that bounty with bright hope, betting their future on a killer harvest and dreaming straight through to autumn. They leaned in over a wheat stalk, its head sagging under grain, and then a fine, dark dust clung to it. The older farmer swore it was volcanic ash from Braphonia, while his partner could only pray things wouldn't get worse. From his window, a 6-year-old boy stared at the same ash drifting down, palm flat against the glass, and he somehow knew this wasn't just smoke. It was an omen. He'd been waiting for this moment all along. The day ash from a volcanic eruption in the nearby Graphonia Empire swallowed the streets in a storm of asphalt. Anne burst in, saying the proposal meeting was almost here, and he snapped back a quick thanks, still buzzing with the idea of turning the asphalt into his opening, convinced his crisis-fueled focus was exactly what his plan needed, and reminded her that, according to Barney's history, that asphalt wouldn't last long and wouldn't even cause direct damage. But the old records weren't just stories. They warned of a deadly pattern. This year's massive, record-breaking harvest would be slammed by a next-year famine on the same unbelievable scale. In a meeting with his father and Raymond, the Baron laid out their plan: mass-produce wheat flour and perfect portable preserved food. But his voice shook with doubt, insisting they had to ride out this lousy harvest or they'd be crushed by whatever disaster came next. And the politics, even worse. Their lightning-fast rise under the Solis Barnes name had put a target on them, drawing the cold, hostile eye of the neighboring Gorman and Hirami Viscounties. So yeah, don't count on any help. The young lord realized he'd have to carry this burden by himself, because their only friendly neighbor, the Forna barony, was stuck in a brutal war with Graphonia down in the south, and couldn't send a single bit of help. He burst into the Solis barony's assembly room, a bead of sweat racing down his temple, and the pressure hit him like a wave as he squared up to the council. Even his waterwheel presentation couldn't compare to how tense the air felt, and that realization hit him hard. At just 6 years old, he was already being allowed to weigh in on the territory's affairs. He knew barony's sudden wealth didn't just happen. It was built from his parents' grit alone. Because when his father first got that land, it was basically raw, undeveloped territory. Scattered villages, no specialized fields, and no real infrastructure to speak of. Cyrus stared back on how his parents built the Solis barony's fortune. His dad, a space-time mage, packed away mountains of goods in spatial storage, while his mom, an earth mage, could judge land and turn it into gold like no one else. Together they sparked a never-ending engine. She hunted and developed farms and mines, and he leveraged trade to grow what they owned, until their territory rose past even higher-ranked viscounties. Then he strode up to his father, praising the massive harvest and soaking in the smiles of every subject. While deep inside, the young heir couldn't shake the fear. Would the people who built this whole territory in one generation really say yes to his proposal? A baron was already freaking out, clutching his head as he stared at the same crisis Cyrus was about to lay bare. Because a huge harvest is a curse and a blessing. Cyrus spelled out the economics. Farmers pay taxes in grain, then keep seeds and food for next year and sell what's left. But here, taxes are based on land size, not how much they harvest. So when yields explode, their share rises. Then the market gets flooded, grain prices crash, and their earnings drop right when they should be celebrating. Right when the pressure hit, Cyrus stepped forward and handed over his formal document, insisting this huge harvest could be a blessing, and that his plan would tame the mess that comes with too much of it. He pitched it as a chance to tap the power of the Estel territory and install protections for whatever trouble tries to crawl back later. Then leaned in as his father, the Baron, stared him down and demanded he spell out the 3 ideas he was ready to push, while the steward in raiment sat there, hanging on every word. He kicked things off with his very first proposal, pitching it to a dark-haired woman, claiming that as grain prices finally fell, this was the perfect moment to buy grain, crank out dried noodles, and stockpile preserved food, while they also cooked up new ways to use those noodles on the battlefield. Then she raised a container for him to see, clearly labeled as still under development. Cyrus didn't just ask for approval, he slammed down the real point. This move would also bring farmers back to work, giving them the income they've been missing and turning it into real jobs. He caught their nod of approval and realized they'd probably wrestled with this problem already, and that just fueled him, so he snapped into motion toward his next point. Then he rolled out his second plan, the ever-normal granary, and promised when the harvest was great, they'd stash the extra grain away to survive the bad years. His plan forced farmers to dump their surplus into this ever-normal granary at a steady, fair price. Then the barony would handle whatever extra came after. By stopping grain from flooding the market, it kept prices from crashing and locked in steadier earnings for the farmers. As Cyrus wrapped up his explanation, Raymond, the steward, couldn't help but gush that it was a brilliant idea, and Cyrus said that with this system, farmers' pay would stay steady like it always had, while any extra grain would get tucked away for free, with zero extra cost. Cyrus' father, the Baron, snapped his gaze away from the window and looked at Raymond, thanking him for his help, admitting the idea of winning the crowd's loyalty didn't sound so bad after all. Meanwhile, Cyrus was already quietly cheering in his head, because the assist he'd pulled off. Then he declared he was moving on to his third and final proposal, the one that hits at the very heart of everything. His family leaned in as he laid out his wild theory. He swore he'd backed it with multiple books, that even small patches of asphalt could be the first warning sign before a massive volcanic eruption. The Baron shrugged at the terrifying idea like it was bad art, and Cyrus fired back that a massive blast across the border would wreck their crops for sure. Then he pitched it as a chance to hoard grain while the prices were still cheap, lining up for a speculation play. Deep down, Cyrus knew his logic was a long shot, but he couldn't admit he actually knew what would happen. So he leaned on one thing and hammered it home. The odds were stacked in their favor. He admitted he'd been terrified of this for years, hunting for a reason that beat his gut-level premonitions, and he couldn't find one. Even if the harvest failed to come, he insisted, selling their preserved food would still put their home right at the heart of the industry. With pure conviction burning in his chest, he started begging about. He bowed low to the council and threw his last, desperate plea at them, begging them to finally believe him. A soft voice shattered the tense silence and called his name, Takar. A soft footstep echoed as she tiptoed toward it. She yanked him into a tight hug, her voice dripping with love and annoyance. "Seriously, you're really something," she muttered, clutching her son hard. Stunned, Cyrus could only stammer, "Mother," and she soothed him with a gentle smile, telling him she could see exactly how much he'd put into it, then promising they'd deface whatever came next. She yanks her son close and squeezes him in a warm, tight hug. Just as the moment gets soft, Cyrus, father, strides in with a confident grin, dropping the bomb that their afternoon plans have flipped, and telling them to wrap it up. Standing shoulder to shoulder with his father, Cyrus finally lets out a breath of victory, feeling like he's cracked the code to true filial piety. This win slams him with a brutal wave of memories from his old life, everything he missed, every time he bolted before it was too late until there was no road back. He rips his mind apart, desperate for the truth. Was it because he felt small beside his amazing family? Or because fear swallowed him whole and kept him from ever giving it his best? He grips his shirt, crushed by the truth that even after they gave him everything, he could never give back, and he blew his one shot to see them again. So that's it, he thinks. Nishida Takahiro's life was just the same. He tears open that past, because as Nishida Takahiro, he was just another invisible salaryman in Japan. He still remembers getting bullied as a kid, always scrambling for approval like it was oxygen. His coworker stole the credit for his hard work, and his silence crushed his chances at success. Now he's a middle-aged recluse, stuck at home. Then the job vanishes, and his 20-year-old wife, Yuko, steps in to carry them both, cheering him on every day. "One day you'll be amazing," she tells him, but he clings to her kindness and takes a risky leap of faith from some half-hearted job. The memory turns to ash. Then, when she finally claws her way out of that coma, all he can do is curse his own mistakes, because the moment she stares at him with raw worry, it shatters him to the core. Even at nearly 50, he finally clenched his teeth, forcing himself to move forward. But then fate snapped. He was the one who collapsed that time, and his wife was left standing alone. This cycle of failure keeps chasing him, night after night. Because every time he's faced with that first step, fear freezes him in place, and he keeps running without ever standing his ground until he finally looks ahead and realizes it's already too late. He stood there by himself, swallowed by the darkness of his past, dragging the crushing regret of two lives, his and Yuko's, and clinging to the desperate, shared hope that they could still rewrite the future. This realization forged steel in his resolve. He knew he could change, and he swore he'd do it one hard step at a time. With determination hardening in his chest, life kept marching forward. Autumn had arrived in the care calendar's 499th year, and harvest was closing in fast. Across the whole land, golden wheat stretched out in shining rows, swaying and glittering as the breeze rolled through. In the care calendar, year 499, the great harvest finally burst onto the scene. This world's wheat took its sweet time to mature, a delay from Cyrus' last life, and when the farmers saw that shocking, overflowing yield, joy hit them like a storm. But that first burst of joy didn't last. Soon the crowd was buzzing with worried voices about the market prices inevitably dropping. To fix it fast, Raymond and Cyrus. Mother stepped in. She ordered the ever-normal granaries to go up one after another, just to soothe the peasants, and Cyrus lit up with joy because they actually believed him and geared up for his plan, even if they were already thinking about it. With everything set in motion, the inevitable finally hit. Before long, the grain price crashed hard, exactly like it said in the history of the barony of Solis. While the market crumpled from the crash, Cyrus, father, swung into action, snapping up grain at prices higher than the going rate. Then bolted in stronger water wheels to churn out dried noodles, giving struggling farmers steady work, and steamrolling right through the mass production of preserved food. At first he didn't trust it, but the moment that second stretch of asphalt hit, his instincts screamed, "This is the perfect play," and he went all in, because deep down he knew his time had finally arrived. That sudden spark of ambition didn't slip by anyone. Cyrus and his sister peered from behind the door and watched their father in a rare good mood. Cyrus couldn't shake it. Ever since the market crash, his father had been everywhere, eyes blazing with a goal, and Cyrus just knew it. This was exactly where spatial storage magic really flexed. Cyrus soon cracked his father's whole scheme. At first it looked like he was just buying wheat for the local market, but secretly he was snatching wheat from other territories at rock-bottom prices, keeping the Solis Baron name buried out of sight. And then Cyrus saw the bigger move. His father was already gearing up to sell those preserved supplies to the capital's knights, running the whole operation with flawless precision and ruthless, cold-blooded control. One day, their dad's good mood practically radiated, so he hauled Cyrus into his office and announced, "If our wheat and preserved food money climbs, I'll bump your allowance by 10%. Cyrus, playing along like a kid, burst out, "Really? Then I'm holding you to it." But Ernest's surprised display froze his father in shock as the moment spiraled right into. While his father snapped back into control, he said dropping grain prices was the kind of happiness only a certain person could pull off, and that a lord changing what he shows on the outside is just how it's done. Cyrus wasn't convinced, though. He kept worrying and demanded to know if this really was okay. The Baron only lowered his head and begged to be excused. He insists that letting his other son keep slipping out of the city is the best move for the territory, so his father mulls it over. Right then, young Cyrus overhears the talk about going outside, and the idea hits him like lightning. The thought clicks into place, and suddenly he has a plan. He knows this is the perfect moment to start training for his third era. He immediately bolts to his parents and their steward, demanding to tag along on an on-site inspection of the granaries. And his mother's shocked, warning him it's no place for a safe trip, not for a 6-year-old lord's son. He begs them, insists he really means it, and when his father demands why, Cyrus lays out his reasoning. He pitched the ever-normal granary, so he needs to understand how the policy is hitting the people in real life. To him, this isn't just a trip. It's the training ground for running the territory's internal affairs, and the way he'll be ready to back his older brother later. His father sits down with Raymond and admits the brutal truth. No excuse changes it. Their actions are still feeding on that farmer's terror. Then the steward pushes back, demanding to know why this has to happen right now. Cyrus blurts out, dead serious, that he has to see for himself how everyone really sees his actions. And inside his head, he pats himself on the back, convinced he's finally found a grown-up excuse with none of the childish quirks he's always stuck with. His confidence gets instantly crushed when his mom leans in with a sly grin and asks, right there, if that's truly his real reason, and it makes him freeze and falter. Her smile detonates his nerves. He panics and wonders if his perfectly crafted excuse just didn't land, then scrambles to figure out what's missing, the logic or the passion, while his words trip over themselves. He drops the act of being grown and bursts out with his real cravings. He wants to hit the outside world and see the Estel lands his parents built, and he's furious that his older brother gets to go while he's stuck. He's instantly hit with embarrassment over his childish outburst, cursing his own slip-up even with his 70-plus years, while his mother just chuckles, grinning at his honest answer and saying, "That's more like you." He realized his honest plea was all it took. His mom broke into a gentle smile and let him go, but only if Raymond went with him too, and she drilled it into him that safety comes first. His dad just stared, stunned that everything had flipped so fast. The Baron snapped his gaze to his wife, demanding why she'd suddenly flipped, and she fired back that it was all on him, because he kept disappearing out with Derek by himself. He raked his fingers through his hair, admitting he got why his younger brother wanted to copy his every move. But somehow, he couldn't shake the feeling those wise words carried a deeper message he wasn't ready to hear. Her face turned cold, and a chilling smirk snapped onto her lips as she asked if he was really unsatisfied with her permission. Then she pressed the threat between the words, daring him to imagine what would happen if he went against her. Cyrus stood off to the side, quietly praising his father for choosing the right path. Case closed. His plan to tag along for the inspection actually worked. Right as they were about to leave, his mom snapped, reminding him that even in their own territory, monsters and bandits still lurked. And then she suddenly stumbled, calling his name as she crashed forward. Her worry only made it crystal clear. This wasn't going away. He let out a heavy sigh, realizing that since he was young and the Lord's son, they had no choice but to pack in more guards for his safety. Then he quietly swallowed his guilt, apologizing in silence for stacking even more work on them. The carriage door slammed shut and the ride kicked off. His freedom clipped to the bone, letting him tag along only to the 3 closest villages and towns, all reachable within a day, but still. He couldn't stop grinning because stepping beyond the city walls felt like winning the world. With a huge, excited grin, he leaned out of the carriage window and shouted a bright farewell to his parents. Then, with Raymond steering the way, every inspection ran perfectly smooth. Even though it went smoothly, the moment he reached the first village, things blew up. He tried to explain his findings, slipped up, and snapped that a granary built so low could be toppled by one big flood. But at least Raymond managed to get his message across clearly to the next village. As they rode along, he replayed the whole day in his head, and the final countermeasure against the bad harvest, his third arrow, was already paying off right away. He'd talked it through with Raymond, and the inspection came back safely. He felt sure that both Raymond and they'd bury his little village rampage from his parents. When they finally pulled up at home, he blurted, "Mom, Dad." With a grin, he thrusts a giant, freshly picked turnip into the air, eyes shining like he just struck gold. Because it's late autumn in the year 499 of the care calendar, and he's practically begging everyone to feast their eyes on his amazing harvest. His parents, the Baron and Baroness, are left totally stunned by how suddenly their son flips into a full-on agricultural craze. Wiping sweat off his brow, he lays out the plan. Since a food shortage is closing in, he's taking matters into his own hands by planting turnips in a neglected patch of land on the mansion grounds. He points out that in this world turnips are usually shoveled to animals as feed, but he shrugs and teases his sister, Krisha, that they may soon upgrade their family titles to farmer barons. He rants about how amazing turnips are, how ridiculously easy they grow, and even the leaves are good to eat. Then flashes back to Zhuge Liang, the legendary war strategist from his old life, who used them to keep his troops fed. First, he lays out the plan. Raymond has to dig into the cultivation conditions across the places they already toured and learn everything the locals know. His plan was stacked from every angle. He begged his dad to call in his merchant connections for turnip seeds and the veggies too, and he made sure Mom was the one who got the request first. Then he ordered Miguel, the head chef, to whip up mouth-watering new recipes, and now those recipes are sprawled across his desk. Now he leans over his desk, grinding through every scrap of knowledge he's collected, then sets out to spread it across the territory, seeds and all, so the next wave of poor artists can't ruin everything. While all that research went down, he tested the cultivation methods himself, and crashed into the dirt in the process. Lying there, he watched her step in and wipe the dirt off his face, her closeness making his heart slam as he realizes his guard is way too good at her job. He'd braced for a dressing down, but instead she surprised him by being cooperative. She even pitched in with the gardening. Then, just as she worked, he spotted his older brother, Derek, out in the distance and called him over, asking if he wanted to join the harvesting. His brother just brushes it off, "I'm fine," and turns away, while Cyrus takes in his own dirt-smeared hands and admits, yeah, he's done everything he can. Then he plants himself stone steady over his pile of harvested turnips, ready to weather whatever grim harvest the land decides to throw at him next. A year later, right as spring hit in 500, disaster signs started showing up. Graphonia, the mountain god, ripped open its fury, and a shadowy arm of rage crashed across the border, choking the southern Care Kingdom in darkness. In Est, with clouds that never moved and rain that never quit, a young boy finally snapped, asking his mother if the sky would stay black forever. She rocked a sleeping infant in her arms and told him it was going to be okay, trusting the Lord's blessings to keep their people alive. Then, a full month later, the gray finally broke and the sky turned blue again. His mother didn't miss a single sliver of worry that crept in after the first wave of relief. After that brutal month of non-stop rain, everyone cheered when the long-awaited sunlight finally showed up. But then the sky went silent, and the rain never came again. And that's when an awful dread started to sink in. If this kept going, their crops were doomed to wither and die. She snapped into action the second she sensed that grim warning. Bad harvest was coming, and she barked orders to fire up every lifting water wheel and fling the water gates wide, pushing every last drop into the irrigation channels, carefully tuning the gates so even the smallest river trickle got diverted, all while making it crystal clear. They couldn't let the river run dry, because other people depended on it too. She whipped her head toward her steward, Raymond, and admitted their moves would drain their resources fast. Then she ordered him to keep digging into the other territories, no matter how pointless they seemed, so they'd stay one step ahead of whatever came next, and Raymond snapped his confirmation with her orders flying out, her face hardened with pure resolve. She knew this had to be done, and it had to be done right now, no questions asked. Now back in the present, Cyrus remembered how his mother snapped into action. She barked orders, the water reached the farmers' fields, and cheers erupted right on cue. She and Raymond even sent word across the whole territory, cutting tax burdens and shifting grain out of the ever-normal granary, and somehow it calmed everyone's nerves fast. Then came the best part. He got confirmation that it was all working. He talked with Raymond, and Raymond told him the farmers had started tightening their belts to survive. The steward shot back that they couldn't drop their guard, but that they still had wiggle room, plenty of stockpiles, and money in reserve. When Cyrus heard that, hope sparked in his voice as he asked if this really meant they could make it through the crisis. The boy finally exhaled in relief. Everything felt shaky until this exact moment, and the little clues he'd found only made him worry more. But now he understood they'd truly pushed through. Elsewhere, his father echoed the same promise, said the turnip plan was running like clockwork, and they'd sail through winter with no trouble, even giving Cyrus the credit. Then he added that they didn't just survive the famine and the money loss, they flipped it into a massive profit, feeding nearby territories and raking in serious wealth. Cyrus stormed back to his room after the meeting, replaying everything that had worked, thanks to a bad harvest that got stopped. Only 2 of the 5 calamities were still waiting to strike. He mapped out what came next. A volcanic eruption in year 500, a border conflict in year 501, and the Orgy River flooding in year 503. Then it hit him. This border fight was the ticking bomb, promising soldier deaths and a crushing financial hit in just a little over a year. He yawned, feeling that crushing exhaustion from stopping the crisis finally slam into him, and decided to coast for the rest of the day, laughing at the irony of nearly dying from overwork, getting reincarnated, and then nearly doing it all over again. As he headed down the hall, a voice snapped through from his father's office. He pressed his ear to the door and finally got it. His dad's weird mood made sense, because the man was ranting about being called the turnip baron, and guilt hit the boy like a wave. Then he shoved it down fast, telling himself it wasn't really his fault. His inner turmoil vanished into thin air, because at the end of the care calendar year 500, 2 maids in his room spotted him throwing a dramatic pose. One maid mused that it might be stress over his studies, while the other swore it was about diplomatic headaches. Then the second maid snapped back to her colleague, saying his current state was not cute at all. Meanwhile, Cyrus was internally losing his mind as everything exploded around him. But the real reason for his worry was the conversation he was still catching. His father was saying that long ago, things soured with the Gorman Viscount seat to the west when a cruel harvest drove grain prices into fights. Yet now their land could finally feed itself and even ship grain at low prices, so the old conflict should have been dead by now. His voice sharpened as he pressed on, then the turnips backfired hard. The Gorman Viscountcy steward shut them down, sneering that it was disgraceful for a noble to prey on a natural disaster and profit by speculating on food. Then the steward, Raymond, piled on the grim news. Down in the high Ramai Viscount seat to the east, they'd already filed the same complaints, and to make it worse, Gorman, upstream, was firing off furious complaints about their territory's water rights while the drought squeezed them dry. While Cyrus listened, he suddenly remembered a line from a book, Care Calendar, year 506. The Solis family's revered young swordsman of light will get pulled under by his allies' scheming and left to deal with it alone. The words of Baron Solis kept pounding in his head. Only 5 years stood between him and the day he'd lose his first family member. Derek, his older brother, the unstoppable swordsman, flashed through his mind, and rage burned. If his own allies hadn't betrayed him, the enemy never would have survived what Derek could have carved through with sheer power. He knew exactly what would happen if he didn't crack this conflict. By the early winter of 501, the food crisis would hit both Estel and Hirami territories like a hammer, and refugees would flee in a flood, swamping the towns while starvation ignited cries of pure resentment. The thought of his future sent a cold fury through him, yet Viscount Gorman didn't budge at all, driving his parents and even Raymond to the edge of their wit. A brutal idea flashed. Maybe they should just crush the Gorman Viscountcy, and he shut it down before it could take root. A month dragged by, and things only spiraled worse. When Cyrus strode through the estate, he peered out the window and felt his worst fear confirmed, because the number of refugees was swelling fast. Seeing the chaos up close, he rushed to his parents, only to find his mother drowning in worry as unrest spread through the city. That shock hit hard, but Cyrus stepped forward anyway, boldly declaring he had a plan. He demanded they fetch his father too, and when his mother blinked in surprise, she agreed on the spot, saying his idea sounded too good to ignore. His mother, face set like stone, threw her full weight behind him, pushing them to move forward with his plan, no doubts, no waiting. After that, in the town of Est, a lone figure in a dark hooded cloak slipped into a wrecked, abandoned building, and once inside, he dropped to his knees among the rubble like his whole journey was weighing down his bones. He watched the crowd beyond his window, and the weight of what he'd done hit him hard, because by ripping history off its rails, he'd accidentally set everything in motion. Now this territory was taking in refugees, all tied back to that mess involving the two viscounts, and even though someone had warned him about it, he never guessed how massive the fallout would be. With grim-level certainty ringing in his bones, Commander Weiss finally understood. The worst fate imaginable was closing in right around the corner. He clenched his resolve, forced his thoughts to stay sharp, and pressed on. In a lavish room inside a massive estate, a light-haired kid named Solis von Tecker slumps at a desk buried under books, the second son of Baron Solis, the ruler of a far-off land south of the Car Kingdom. Then drops the bombshell. He's living his third life right now. Then it hits. Flash after flash of his past crashes into his mind. First, Nishida Takahiro, a Japan salaryman who ground himself to death and left his wife behind. Second, Takir, the Solis family's second son, swallowed by disaster. He watched his siblings and family fall, then got broken in war and executed, or at least, that's what he thought. The memory of his first death crashes back, right when he finally drops, spent and collapsing from pure exhaustion. Then, when he remembers what he left behind, a heartbreaking image of his wife crashes into his mind. The story snaps to the present, year 501. An 8-year-old Dakar throws his arms wide at his desk, beaming as he declares he's finished all his assignments for the day. He finishes up his studies, snatches his formal jacket, and rockets down the stairs, dying to get out and have some fun. He strides down the corridor, and a maid with short dark hair spots him at once. So he tells her he's heading out, and she immediately insists on going with him. She darts in to help with his jacket, swearing that as his attendant it's her job. Then Carr just waves her off with a relaxed grin, telling her he's got it as he slides the jacket on himself. Right when he's done, a hand clamps down on him from behind. Solis von Derek, the older blonde-haired eldest son, locks him in a playful headlock and starts teasing him like, Mr. Prodigy. He asks if he's heading out again, even though his assignments are already finished, and the car roars for his older brother. Even with his brother's teasing voice, Takar gets the real message under it all. He's muttering to himself that Derek is just too good at everything and should remember who's supposed to be the younger brother, while Derek quietly seems to buy the whole prodigy assessment. In his previous life, he clung to the memory of his brother's legend. Half awe, half dread. Derek had mastered the sword at 13, led his first campaign at 14, and by 16 his victories, skill, and fame had neighboring kingdoms on edge, while Cyrus couldn't even count how many times he got knocked down when he squared off against him. That razor-sharp stare made Derek blurt out, "Why are you staring at me like that?" Cyrus swallowed hard and swore to himself. This future had to be rewritten, because if history stayed the same, his older brother would die in battle in just 5 years. Derek misread the look and with a grin ruffled his hair, teasing that it was just another one of his secrets. Then Cyrus blurted, all flustered, that it was nothing at all. He broke free and bolted down the road, swearing he'd return with something delicious from the market stalls. While Derek watched, the young boy finally slipped into the special refugee camp zone in Est, a town packed with displaced people. Now with his maid Eliza by his side, Cyrus took in the scene, and when Eliza said things finally seemed to be under control, Cyrus nodded like, "Yep, it's all because everyone stepped up." Last year, the Care Kingdom's southern border got hit by a brutal wave of disasters spilling in from the neighboring Graphonia Empire. First a volcanic eruption, then a scorching drought. While Estel territory scraped by on its preserved stores and steady, ever-normal granary, the famine crushed 2 nearby Viscounties and drove refugees flooding into Estonia. Under the House Steward Raymond Sand's orders, refugee aid hit full force. An official welcome zone was carved out inside the lower city walls, and the displaced got temporary shelter and food handouts, with steaming warm soup made from dried noodles becoming their staple. After locking eyes with the chaos, Cyrus made his move. He declared he'd start by walking straight up to the reception desk, and Eliza gave a quiet nod. At the loud, bustling reception desk, Claire barked orders to the fresh arrivals. Line up, step up to the receptionist, and get registered. Because she'd be jotting down your name, gender, age, your previous job, and the names of any friends who came with you. As she kept grilling them for their origins, she asked where they were from, and a refugee finally said they hailed from a village east of Estel. Then her quill started tapping hard on the page, writing it all down. At the refugee reception desk, a supervisor snaps through the registration for a refugee couple, then presses a registration token into their hands and warns them. Don't you dare lose it. Food distribution and work assignments depend on it. She points them toward a job application bulletin board, reminding them the camp itself was built by refugees, own hard labor. Just as the couple thanks her and starts to walk away, she tells them, if anything feels off, go straight to the consultation window. Her cold, professional mask cracks the second she spots a familiar figure racing in. She gasps, blinks in shock, and yells, "Ah, Takiya-sama, Cyrus!" The moment she sees her, she greets her warmly and praises her work on the spot. Caught off guard by the praise, she flushes bright red and blurts out a shaky, heartfelt thank you. The moment the exchange happens, every woman at the desk, every refugee working there, turns to stare, then swarms Cyrus, thanking him over and over for saving their lives and paying them wages. And while they keep asking how they could ever repay him, Cyrus looks around, shocked to realize the whole place already knows who he is. The Solis Bernie's child prodigy, and that thought hits him like a bad omen. The supervisor bursts in and snaps at the women for crowding around, telling them the best way to repay their benefactor is to work hard. Then one of them bows low in apology as Cyrus quietly apologizes too for the whole commotion. She snaps her head towards Cyrus and blurts out an apology, admitting everyone's been talking non-stop about his status and his proposals, and Cyrus just laughs it away. But then he admits he's starting to regret taking things too far. Later, as Cyrus walked beside her with that blonde noblewoman, he leaned in and asked at the reception desk, "Is everything running smoothly?" The supervisor nodded and said, "Yes, and it's getting better every day." Even the brand new refugees were picking things up fast, and the stack of tasks they knocked out each day kept growing. Her sharp professional voice cracks with warmth as she pours out her gratitude, saying the refugees are truly thankful for those hot meals and the chance to work. Then she drops a bombshell. She grew up in an orphanage, so the trust people place in her hits her like a wave. Tears blur her eyes as she blurts out an apology for the detour, but Cyrus cuts in softly, calling her name Claire. Claire meets her gaze with fresh confidence, promises that he'll need her help even later, and then, renewed and fired up, Claire looks up and firmly nods, ready to back him. With a maid at his side, Cyrus storms in and declares the reception area, packed with complex systems, is a must if they're going to survive the calamities ahead, so he calls for them to set everything up right now and makes it clear. It's their turn to help too. He strides toward the growing line of refugees and explains the system's true goal. Lock down the personnel it needs, then drops the bombshell that the registration tokens were forged by Carl back at the workshop. Tokens meant for something else before they got repurposed. They push forward and flash a token at Claire. One stamped with a bird emblem and the number 1881, and straight up praise her for her amazing work, even hinting she's being lined up for a managerial role. She takes a hard look at how much everything has shifted, and just like Raymond, she finally understands Cyrus' cause. No more scolding a boy 10 years younger. Now she studies him with real respect, because inside her, the old ice lady persona is completely gone. Her thoughts land on one hard truth. Cyrus isn't just around, he's become a solid supporter, a real ally. Refugee aid is moving smoothly until a few days later when a cold official notice hits. The Gorman Council is demanding every single one of their refugees be sent back. This was a powder keg of trouble. So many refugees had spilled in from the Gorman and Hiremia Viscounties, and the whole point of the policy was simple. Everyone got the same support, no matter where they came from, until that official notice slammed the door on it. The Solis family got hit with an impossible choice. The Gorman Viscounty refugees could stay in the camps and eat, but nobody was allowed to give them any more work. But the refugees were already ahead of the game. Rumors of the new policy tore through the camp, and when registration day finally hit, Not one person claimed they were from Gorman-Viz County. Since the officials couldn't pin down their origins, they had no choice but to register them anyway, knowing full well the truth. A few days later, a loud official outside the reception area yells for everyone to line up and register, promising them there's more than enough food. And yeah, the rumors had been planted on purpose to warn the refugees early, but nobody could shake that nagging doubt about whether this plan would actually run as smoothly as they hoped. Right in front of everyone, Cyrus thrusts his hand up, locks eyes with the crowd, and tells the outsiders of Estel territory, "Don't freak out, just get in line." Then he explains they'll only be asked for their name back in their hometown or village. He shouts, "Excuse me," at a tall, cloaked figure looming in the middle of the refugee crowd, and the young boy cranes his neck, waiting for something, replying with just, "Yes." The hooded man whips around, and there, right behind him, is a bunch of worn-out mercenaries. He tells Cyrus they used to work for the Gorman Viscount C and asks, straight up, if they could get a meal. Cyrus clocks how honest the guy is, and his mind races over how to deal with mercenaries tied to Gorman. He keeps going, voice flat, as he admits their contract got cut because their old employers decided they were nothing but mouths to feed. Waste. The moment Cyrus hears it, everything clicks, and he quickly tells him not to worry at all. He tells the man they've probably been through hell on the road, gestures to the registration area, then orders them to line up and register at the reception desk. Once they're done, they'll get food right away, and the mercenary can't hide the shock that flashes across his face. The man glances down at Cyrus and his face softens for a split second. Then he nods, smiles, and says, "Thank you, I owe you one." A few hours later, Cyrus was up to his elbows, hauling a huge basket of used dishes as he helped clean up. Then a voice rang out behind him, and it recognized him as the guy from earlier. He whips around, and there's the mercenary leader closing in fast. The guy says the reception desk told him Cyrus is the feudal lord's son, the mastermind who cooked up the whole relief plan. Cyrus gives a nervous little laugh like, "Yeah, doesn't exactly look like it," because he's been getting snapped at his whole life for not acting like a real noble. Once he realizes it's true, the mercenary drops into a deep bow and blurts out an apology for his earlier arrogant attitude. Then he admits he's blown away, not just by Cyrus' generosity, but because Cyrus was the very one who pushed for the refugee relief measures in the first place. He snaps his eyes up, fixes you with a fierce stare, and blurts his name, then asks, "Why Schwarzfach?" He says it's great to meet him, shoots out an apology for how he looks right now, and jumps in to help with the cleanup. Then introduces himself as Takar, Baron Solis' second son. After that, he straight up thanks Weiss, the newly appointed leader and the face of their 30-person doppel, mercenary crew. He smiles at the man like, "No matter what hits us, we stick together." Then the name lands, Weiss Schwartz, and it pulls him up short as he repeats it, staring at it like it's got answers. Weiss finally blurts out their mess, and yeah, it's humiliating, but ever since the Gorman Viscountcy slammed down that ban on helping outsiders, they've been wandering from town to town with empty hands, starving for food. As Cyrus listens, that name hits him, Black Hawk Weiss, because he's heard it before and the familiarity punches straight through him. He freezes for a beat, confusion flashing across his face as he scrambles to figure out where those names belong. Realization slams into him like a freight train. He stumbles back, the bowl of food crashes to the floor, and a strangled gasp of total shock rips out of his mouth. His thoughts slam into place like a puzzle finishing itself, and suddenly, everything clicks and he remembers. A wave of memories crashes into his mind. Graphonia Empire's Black Hawk Weiss, the so-called invincible general of the Northern Expeditionary Corps. 12 years from now, it's him who's going to invade the Care Kingdom and seize the Estel territories. Snapping back to reality, Cyrus spots Weiss kneeling to gather the shattered plates, urging him to stop pushing himself, and that thought detonates in his head. This is the same man who had him executed. He can't even drag up the details of his own death. Everything's blurry, like it happened in a fog. Because when he finally surrendered, he was so dazed he doesn't even know if Weiss was there, since his focus got hijacked by some dude's beard. While his mind reels, Weiss comes back in and offers to repay him. The mercenary leader locks eyes with him, eyes burning with sincerity, and vows they'll repay his kindness no matter what, then tells Cyrus to reach out whenever the time comes. Weiss's offer hits like a spark, and Cyrus's mind snaps into action. He's got one clear goal. In a silent, frantic plea, he begs Weiss to stay far away from the Graphonia Empire. His head spun from the brutal truth. This was the kind of emergency that decides everything. He stood over the man who would one day become his executioner, and panic seized him so hard he could barely breathe. He had to come up with a counterattack, and he had to do it right now, before this one shot to turn the tables vanished. In his study, Cyrus trembles with raw fear, his own soul hovering beside him like a jittery ghost, and he blasts out the call for an emergency meeting, trying to find a way to dodge the death he can already feel closing in. His mind snapped straight to the truth of how he met his end in a past life. Commander Weiss Schwarzfach, the Graphonia Empire's unstoppable young general, the Black Falcon, a political mastermind and battlefield monster who burst onto the scene, snatched the throne for the third prince, and never ever lost. Back then's history hits harder in your mind, crystal clear. Because in the year 513 of the Care Kingdom, a 20-year-old Takir got an imperial order from the brand new emperor. Invade. He already knew the fastest path ran straight through the T-gun settlement, and with his forces stretched thin, he still chose to march and do his duty like a true noble. Prepared for the worst, a soldier burst in, yelling a frantic report. Over 50,000 demons were charging from the demon realm. Tiker's jaw dropped because the Empire was only supposed to have 30,000 men. Then it clicked. Weiss had pulled a sneaky flanking move, marching his troops through the deadly realm in secret to fool both armies. He remembered how he'd slammed into them with a tiny squad just to buy his people a few precious seconds to run. Then they still got crushed. General Weiss even dangled mercy, offering to take his surrender and spare his subjects, but only if he handed over his land and his own life. Right after that, Weiss seized Estel, put him down, and wrapped it all up, because that was the full, brutal story he'd learned from the last timeline. Cyrus Grimesy snaps back to the present, figuring it out fast. The mercenaries got treated like trash in the Gorman Viscountcy, so now they're clawing their way toward the Graphonia Empire. And the only route, straight through the demon realm where monsters are waiting for them. Even if someone catches them elsewhere, Cyrus knows the truth. They'd still end up under the same cruel thumb. The group clocking just how weak they'd become from hunger and exhaustion. In his past life, he never had a single countermeasure, so nobody would have expected his territory to come through for them. Still, even like this, he's dead sure they'll somehow push through and reach the Empire safe. Then it hits him hard. The injustice, the loss of their companions, that's all it takes to make them hunt down everyone in their way, and his eyes blow wide as it all clicks. The Gorman Viscount's moves are the exact reason his death flag was sealed. As his father's lecture about how it's disgraceful for a noble to profit from disaster pounds in his skull, Cyrus snaps his fist onto the desk, panic turning into purpose. Because he knows if the mercenaries reach the Empire, it's over for him and everyone he's responsible for, so he frantically hunts for any way to stop them. His grit crumbles into pure frustration. He slams down at his desk and groans because nothing comes to him, not even a spark, and the more he pushes, the worse it gets until all he can think is one idea, anything to flip their faces. He stood by the window, his face tightening with pure determination. There was no other option. He had to move before the mercenaries slipped out of town. He clenched his fist, eyes lighting up at the perfect chance to use his childlike face, and his goal snapped into focus. Befriend the mercenary leader, Weiss. With purpose driving him, he launched his act, dashing around with a stick like any kid on the playground. And under the mask of checking on the refugee camp, he kicked off his daily visits to the corner where the mercenaries had built their operation. Every single day, he ran around their camp and kept a close eye on them, then snapped to attention at the mercenaries' shouts, cheering and charging right alongside the drills. Cyrus' steady presence finally snapped the attention of one of the armored men, who barked that a lord's son didn't belong in a place like this. Cyrus didn't even flinch. He just grinned, thanked the man, and declared that their business for the morning was officially done. He even marched right up to their leader and greeted Weiss by name, and Cyrus told him straight that his parents had cleared it. This chance to learn was worth it, on one condition. He had to help out with the food distribution. Weiss brushed it off with a humble smile, saying the boy's words were way too kind, then simply ignored what was happening. After they clicked, he climbed onto a crate so he could face Weiss eye to eye, then asked about something he'd read, an old feud between the Care Kingdom and the Graphonia Empire, and whether a sudden strike might be on the way. Weiss just chuckled, like that was exactly where his worries came from. Mercenaries' reaction sealed it. Cyrus's gut feeling was right. He knew Weiss and his crew were marching for the Empire for a job, and that matched what he remembered, Weiss getting promoted to general after crushing the war against the Suradachi. So with the region map flashing in his mind, Cyrus pressed, asking if Weiss meant the southern gate. Weiss admitted capturing the fort would be a brutal mountain to climb, even for an imperial general, because the kingdom fights back with its elite 30,000-strong Knight Order, and a chain of other forts that would turn supply lines into a full-on nightmare. And as he laid it out, relief hit Cyrus like a wave. His relief barely lasted before his hand slipped over the ground again, and a far darker thought hit him like a wave. What if he tried a completely different move this time? He snatched a stick and scratched a rough map into the dirt, while his careful, steady hands moved, and the mercenary Vice kept a sharp eye on him. He mapped it out on the spot, laying bare the strategic plan, where a gap in that massive mountain range split the two countries, the exact route to the capital, and where the southern gate sat, only to warn that pushing through would be brutal because the region's powerful nobles would fight every step. Weiss got the real point behind that explanation. Then he tossed out a scary, what if? What if an invading army just skipped the fort and slid around it? He laid out a flanking plan where part of the troops would split off and sneak through a tight passage inside the demon realm, right along the edge of the Hirame Viscount's seat. He dragged the theory through the dirt, pointing it out like a map, saying it would let them hit the Estel territory with a sudden strike. Then slip away through the Cornell barony and march straight to the capital, dodging every other lord and fortress in their way. And when Weiss heard it, his smile vanished and seriousness settled in. Under the mercenary's intense stare, he snapped his attitude into something else, saying he was only curious after reading something like it in a book, and that he feared their home could turn into a battlefield. Then he faked a tiny yelp, thinking to himself just how hard Weiss was watching him. Weiss snapped that the idea was fascinating, then slammed the brakes hard, because there were 5 reasons it'd be a nightmare to pull off, before turning to ask why the young master would even dream up something like this. Cyrus just said it looked like the easiest path, while his mind raced on how to move forward without making Weiss lock in and get extra suspicious. The mercenary started rattling off why it'd never work. First, it would demand a huge, mobile force, and that's a weakness. Second, they'd have to push through the deadly demon realm. Third, Imperial soldiers don't know the local routes well enough to cross safely. Fourth, the roads are too undeveloped to keep supplies moving. And fifth, they'd need flawless coordination with the main force from a distance. So Cyrus just played dumb, acting innocent and curious. He wrapped up his assessment and basically said, "No roads, wild unfamiliar terrain, brutal supply lines, and monsters guaranteed. You can't march a huge army through that route." He called the whole plan dead on arrival, yet Cyrus pretended to be relieved because one grim truth stayed locked in place. In just 12 years, exactly that would happen. Cyrus kept his face calm, but his mind was sprinting, because Weiss knew that route too well, the same path Cyrus used to reach the Empire. Weiss didn't just recognize it. He understood the demon realm dangers the Imperial army never saw coming. And it wasn't luck either. He was the one who built the road from Estel to T-Gun. Soon, his cavalry would tear through that route, snatching food by raiding harvest seasons. The commander driving this brutal strike, the swift Black Falcon. He grinned and said, "I must have been worrying for nothing," and Weiss shot back that the whole idea was wild. Then it basically blew his eyes wide open. Cyrus quickly apologized for raising something so strange, but deep down he knew he'd just spotted the final piece of the puzzle. It was this man's betrayal that let his nemesis, someone he hasn't even met yet in this new life, rise so fast. Weiss kept breaking down the plan, and he listened like it mattered, because the mercenary finally found the fatal crack. The Empire couldn't protect its rear without a defensive base, and if Marquis Hasburg struck, they'd get wiped out completely. Right before Cyrus could dive deeper, he cut in with a harmless question. Where would Weiss set up a base if he were really the Empire's general? And inside, the boys were already screaming because they knew the answer. After a quick think, Weiss pointed straight at T-Gun Mountain. Cyrus basically knew what he'd say, so when he shouted with pure victory, he proved the invasion route was built exactly the way he'd predicted. He slapped down a map showing the path from the Graphonia Empire, crossing the Demon Realm past the southern gate fort, and cutting straight into the T-Gun region through the same lands he'd laid out earlier. Then he finished the bombshell. They'd already been planning to use that route to reach the border too. He stared at the mercenary, and dread tightened in his chest, because this wasn't the moment for smiles or friendship. To survive what was coming next, he had to steal the power of the greatest strategist he knew. Right as that hit him, Weiss's focus snapped away. His face hardened, and he pressed the mercenary with the urgent question he'd been summoned to handle. Standing before the steward Raymond, Cyrus blurts out that he wants to bring a proposal to his parents ASAP, even if he still has a few details to iron out. Raymond immediately apologizes for stealing the boy's time, but Cyrus waves it off, insisting he's got no complaints at all. To kick things off, he asks Raymond to lend him his power, and the steward instantly agrees, no words needed. Right as they're about to move, The maid bursts into the room and declares she's brought refreshments for them. Seated in the room, Raymond gives a soft smile, drops an old saying, and warns that rushing only leads to regret. Haste makes waste. Cyrus takes a sip, and the warm drink calms his nerves as Raymond keeps a sharp eye on him from across the room. He tells Raymond he's got 2 bombshell proposals to discuss, and asks for a second so he can lay out the quick outline. He starts with the first proposal, saving the refugees' future, and Cyrus rips into it, saying this dead-end status quo can't last. They should grab the chance to accept them as new citizens and boost the territory's production power, but Raymond snaps back and demands specifics. How exactly is he going to get them integrated? Cyrus wastes no time. He announces his plan. Recruit them, then build a brand new settlement on T-Gun Mount. Gorman instantly fires a question. Why does he think T-Gun is the right place? Cyrus, sensing those stewards' sharp eyes on him, shoots back that the refugees are mostly from the Gorman and Hirami territories. He leans in and lays out the map. T-Gun's a remote spot right near both of their homelands, yet hidden enough to make it hard to watch. He admits bandits and monsters thrive in places like this, but he insists T-Gun's wild defenses keep it guarded and steady. Then he drops the real bombshell. This settlement isn't a stop. It's the launch pad he's been planning, a base to push into the deadly demon realm where the riches are worth the risk. Hold up, hear the proposal first before you bring up anything else. He leaned in and asked Cyrus if he knew the 2-headed falcon mercenaries were staying at ESD for the time being, and Cyrus said, "Yeah, I've heard the news." The young lord laid out his plan and made his case. Since the Solis family guards the border, they must keep forging a stronger army without pause. After talking with the mercenaries, he swore the leader was top tier and the whole crew was stacked, and then he hit them with the verdict. Don't let this one rare chance to recruit them slip away. Stuart stared, deep in thought, while Cyrus pushed forward and tied it straight to his first proposal. If they wanted the new settlers safe, they'd have to hire guards, and luckily, the whole grain plan they'd just been mulling gave them the money to do it. He mapped out the whole plan, used those mercenaries to guard the new settlement in the short term, then let it boost their fighting power later too. It's killing 2 birds with 1 stone, he insisted, and when he asked his steward for his take, Raymond stayed cool, but pointed out the huge price tag. Hiring 30 people would cost a fortune. A sly grin tugged at Raymond's lips as he asked if that was really all Cyrus had to offer, and the whole thing made him uneasy. Because Cyrus shot a quick gulp at his cup and knew, the moment it hit, that his steward had clocked his flimsy pitch. He finally got it. Raymond probably already got Anne's report, and with a sly, confident smile, he admitted to himself that, yeah, he had a plan to knock those costs down. Then he laid out the rest of his scheme, letting the mercenary boss keep doing what he always did, monster hunting and guarding caravans, while also serving the barony. That extra pay would fatten the mercenaries' pockets and finally make the whole budget deal possible. He slipped a personal plea right into the proposal. He wanted Weiss as his instructor, and with Cyrus backing him as proof of the man's trustworthiness and his legendary skill in both swordplay and military strategy, Cyrus made it clear he was desperate to learn combat tactics under Weiss's guidance. Stuart finally nodded in agreement, saying the proposals had no real flaws and the paperwork could be handed straight to Darren-sama and Karisu-sama. Then Cyrus started to breathe easy, but Raymond snapped him shut with one sharp, warning word, and the young lord's face dropped. He grimaced as the truth hit him. This was way too soon to start training people with wisdom. He could already feel the coming headache because his superiors would almost certainly demand they first test that mercenary's trustworthiness before believing a word of his story. They grilled him about what he planned to do next for the settlement. He laid out his vision for T-Gun with razor-sharp clarity, turning it into a thriving settlement to power their economy and stand guard over the southern edge of Estel territory. Because as the second son, he felt it was his duty to back his older brother, the future head of the house, and he said this foundation was non-negotiable. He couldn't afford to let it slip, couldn't. Next day in a stuffy meeting room, Raymond looked Cyrus, father in the eye, and promised he'd take the plan from here and finish it all. The old man looked worn to the bone, then shifted his gaze to Cyrus, saying he'd heard every detail from Raymond, and that for his son it was always one crisis after another. Talking to his wife, he spilled his money worries. Yeah, the barony had gotten a little breathing room from the latest profits, but this new development would cost on a whole different level, and he couldn't shake the dread that once the scope was finalized, they might not be able to cough up the full 10% he'd promised. Right when he started to voice his doubts about poking the viscounts, his wife snapped him shut. Cold facts, no debate. She reminded him their last profit came purely from Cyrus' plan, and without it their territory would have been rotting in the same dire mess as the others. Then she drew a hard line with that unshakable stare. Politics was his problem to handle, and it had nothing to do with their son. Elsewhere, Cyrus replayed his father's worries in his head, the clashes with the Viscounts, the refugee crisis, and the fight to grab resources from the demon realm. Then it hit him, quiet but brutal. His father was all sympathy, while his mother was the real powerhouse. His father dropped the final verdict. Plans would move forward, and Raymond would hash out the details with Cyrus next. But the request for a swordsmanship instructor got shut down hard. Even worse, the settlement's governing would be delayed until Cyrus turned 15, and the boy swallowed it and agreed. Then he leaned in and told his son the good news. For all his past winning proposals, Cyrus was getting 50 gold coins as a reward. He warned him that it was a fortune, enough to equal years of pay for an everyday commoner, and told him to spend it smart. Cyrus stared up stunned as the words hit him. That number hit him like a punch, 50 gold coins. He instantly felt what it meant. For an 8-year-old noble from a barony, it was a mountain of money, and his mind spun as he realized he'd have to spend it to plan his next move, his next era. He snapped himself together, deciding to focus on what success would look like. Because yeah, the instructor's proposal getting denied was rough, but at least the mercenary group could still be handled through the proper arrangements. So once his mind was made up, he bowed low and asked to be excused. Just as everything was going silent, a young man with long blonde hair pulled into a ponytail burst in. Cyrus had barely registered him when Derek stepped in behind him, trailing a young noblewoman. The newcomer straight up called Cyrus Nisama, threw out an apology for crashing the moment, and then demanded to be heard, insisting this whole mess had his name written all over it too. His request got approved, and moments later he was standing right before his father's desk, Cyrus at his side. The Baron looked drained, still letting him talk, but dread crept in like cold wind. So the young man asked politely if he could stand there, and a confused Cyrus quickly nodded along. What he said next hit Cyrus like a slap to the face. His eyes snapped wide, and all he could think was, "Teach this is." With a calm, steady voice, the blonde brother submitted his formal petition, demanding permission to train under mercenary leader Weiss and begging his father to hear him out. And the sheer audacity of it hit Cyrus like a lightning strike, leaving him completely stunned as the young man just stayed locked in, eyes sharp and unshaken. In his father's study, Derek straight up makes a formal request for himself and his little brother, Cyrus, pushing their shared dream of training under the mercenary group's leader. A sudden proposal drops like a bomb, catching their parents completely off guard. While their dad, eyes flicking up from his desk, grills Derek about why he made the move so fast, and their mom just watches, worry written all over her face. Moments later, he nudges his son to lay out the full reason, and right beside his older brother, Cyrus blurts a massive, excited yes to prove they mean it. Man starts laying out his argument and reminds his father about the 9 levels of swordsmanship. Then he breaks it down like a ladder, clear from clueless blade users all the way up to the sword god, so everyone knows exactly where they stand. He fires his argument straight at his father, admitting the Solis barony's soldiers are fearless, but most can't actually fight with a blade. Then his father nods and admits his son is right. Since the other 2 available sword masters already lit the fuse and now run things as managers, it's gotten tough for Cyrus to get proper lessons from them. Yet he's clearly blown away by how deep his brother's foresight really goes. Cyrus can't shake how relentless his brother is, and it sparks a brutal memory. Back in the last timeline, Derek became a sword saint at just 16. And even now, the kid's still loaded with terrifying potential, because people swear he's started to manifest light magic too, something almost no one in this kingdom can do. That thought snaps into place and hits him like a thunderclap. His brother is developing about 3 years faster than he ever did in the earlier timeline, and he can't help but whisper Derek's name, stunned and disbelieving. While Cyrus is still trying to absorb this bombshell, his father, swayed by Derek's argument, finally nods and agrees to Cyrus's request, promising he gets it handled by Raymond, especially if Cyrus isn't happy with his current training partner. Then he starts pitching the idea, claiming a sword expert is what he's after and hinting he already has the perfect person in mind, until Cyrus cuts him off mid-sentence, calling him straight out, "Father." His youngest son shot him one razor-sharp look, and the words hit like a blade. "How naive of you." Cyrus roared out the real reason his father was so naive, claiming Sir Weiss's swordsmanship had already climbed to the level of a sword demon, one full stage beyond anything his dad could comprehend, and the Baron staggered back, his mind spinning from the bombshell. The news hit like a hammer, and the Baron crumpled forward onto the table, completely broken, His wife, Derek, and Cyrus just stared at the deadly silence that followed. Eric shot his father a confident wink, told him he totally got the worry, and said it was fine, just not yet. They'd hold off until after his father had taken a look at the evidence, then they'd make the final call. The Baron, still stuck in thought, finally seemed to give in. With everything that just went down, the meeting finally wrapped up. Then the Baron snapped his orders and demanded a deep, no-holds-barred investigation into Weiss and all of his mercenary crews. Cyrus felt relief flood his chest. His brother's sudden help had genuinely saved him this time. But he couldn't shake the question of why Derek's power jumped so fast. Right behind him, Derek threw his victory party, grinning like it was only the beginning, and Cyrus felt certain they'd be allowed to train with Weiss once they gathered enough intel. The older brother's motive was crystal clear. Once he saw how freakishly talented his little brother was, he went all out to make sure he'd never lose his place. That realization hit Cyrus like a wave, so he rushed to Derek and apologized for setting him off again by accident, only for Derek to shrug and say it was no big deal. And that's when Cyrus finally figured out why his brother had been acting so weird. At the mercenaries' training camp on the outskirts of Est, the hours drag by. Then an 11-year-old Solis von Derek finally eases a sword up onto his shoulder, yawns with pure tired satisfaction, and declares they're calling it a day, thanking their instructor for the lesson. He wipes the sweat off his brow and thanks Weiss like crazy, while the mercenary boss stands right beside a grinning Cyrus, watching the kid's progress unfold. Exhausted after training, he finally crashed into a deep, sound sleep, and now 3 months have blown by since the brothers started studying under Weiss. 8-year-old Cyrus is bursting with energy, cackling and laughing at full volume, while his older brother Derek, still half asleep, grumbles that he doesn't get it from nowhere and calls him sloppy. Cyrus was more stunned by his brother's lightning-fast rise, remembering how Weiss kept everything brutally strict. Yet Derek drank it all in and his skills exploded. Cyrus leaned in and asked, "Are you already a sword expert?" Because even their father looked like he'd seen a ghost. Derek had blitzed past the swordsmen, and even the veteran ranks so fast that regular soldiers wouldn't stand a chance anymore. And it made sense, because their training never changed, 3 days a week, bouncing between the temporary grounds and their mansion's courtyard. He flashed a shy smile and gave all the credit for his success to an amazing teacher. With the stars blazing above, Cyrus felt painfully useless, stuck as a trainee, still nowhere near graduating, even though other kids his age were already slicing circles with swordsmanship, and the shame crushed him. He slumped by a tree, convinced he should have been learning just as hard as his brother under their legendary teacher. But somehow he felt like he was falling behind, and Weiss just watched in silence from nearby, while Derek dozed against the tree trunk. You finally let out this long, exhausted sigh that feels like it weighs a ton. Even with his own frustrations gnawing at him, everything in his big plan was clicking into place. His swordsmanship training and the settlement preparations were running just like he'd imagined. His thoughts snapped straight to the settlement's details. He'd already sent field investigators, even bringing in a few refugee workers to the T-gun area. First, they had to throw up inns and shops to forge a real base for hunters to enter and leave the demon realm. At first it would stay small, but the plan was clear: make it run like a normal town. The only thing that still gnawed at him was the missing outer wall. He wanted it up fast just to keep everyone safe. He figured it out. Things were going so smoothly because Raymond was calling the shots, and thank goodness he'd brought him in. Even the mercenary crew was pulling their weight, swapping in and out as they visited the settlement. The advance party had welcomed them, and now they were teaming up with everyone else to upgrade the town. And the best part, the big construction crew was set to arrive in 6 months to officially establish the settlement. He was completely lost. Then his brother's voice snapped through the chaos. "Hey, Takyr!" Cyrus spun around and answered. For a second, everything clicked back into place. Weiss was already pushing the settlement forward through his vice-captain, bouncing between Est and the new settlement to keep their training moving. And the big deal was locked too. The Baron Salai's household and the mercenaries had agreed on a first 2-year contract, with the option to renew every year after that. Derek slapped a grin on his face and waved a wooden sword like it was destiny, while Cyrus slumped there, exhausted, trying to tune him out. Because Derek swore he'd rested enough and demanded a duel, and Cyrus only begged to be left in peace. His brother burst into laughter, clamped his hands on Cyrus's shoulders, and warned, "Keep this up and you'll be stuck as a trainee forever." The words crushed Cyrus. His face sank with disbelief. In the background, Weiss kept his eyes on him, telling himself Cyrus just needed a breather, because he was sure the kid could pull it off. But his mind was already somewhere else, soaring above the land as he finally locked in on building countermeasures for the 5 great calamities. Later in his room, while he was hunched over his desk studying, someone knocked, and then the door swung open. She stepped in and said the delivery from the workshop had finally arrived for him. He instantly got it. This was it, the exact thing he'd begged Carl to build, and the moment he saw it, he snapped, "Send it to my room." Eyes locked in, he knew this finally meant he could unleash the 5th arrow. His thoughts tore back to why this project even existed, because he remembered the future he'd already seen. Next year, when he turns 9, the Solis Baron's army is about to get crushed in a brutal border battle, bleeding out so badly that their power gets shattered. This is the 4th calamity out of the 5, and to stop it, he's been forging the answer ever since he was 5. The weapon he'd been forging all this time finally took shape, a bow. It was built to nail 3 deal-breakers, reach enemies from beyond their own grasp, slice straight through the Empire's iron cavalry armor, and work without the wielder needing elite skill, so anyone could pick it up and use it. With Carl pitching in at the workshop, Cyrus started by pushing him to upgrade the world's bow materials. So Carl forged a composite bow by stacking different woods. Then they tore it up again, leveling it with metal and monster materials. At the workshop, Geld strained like crazy to pull the completed bow into shape, grunting that it wasn't for just anybody. Carl watched in awe, while Cyrus suddenly clocked what was wrong. His powerful, long-range bow also demanded brutal physical strength, ripping straight through one of his core design goals. He debuilt a whole new weapon, a crossbow that mashed together the pull of a composite bow and the power of a compound bow, pulled straight from a 20th century design, using 4 pulleys to slash the draw weight while blasting the arrow out with way more velocity. And if you mounted it on a stand, it turned into something he could aim and fire with brutal ease and deadly accuracy. Once he remembered how brutal that grind was, when the workshop finally erupted with orders for water wheels, he snatched a prototype and hauled it home to push the research himself, replaying everything Nishida had studied on those videos while he obsessed over the string's placement, attachments, sizes, and every wild combination. That fierce dedication was driven by one deep, unshakable wish in his chest, to protect his family and guard their turf with everything he had. He felt it if those emotions ever died, he'd have quit years ago. He poured everything his father handed him into this project, piece by piece. And in the end, it was Carl who nailed the final, make-or-break tweaks to the bow's materials and components. After burning through all that hard work, the prototype finally clicked into existence. Then he burst with pride, lifting the lid of the wooden crate to reveal it in triumph. He grinned as he unveiled his masterpiece, a brutal crossbow nearly as tall as he was, while a whole lineup of finished models sat behind him, all waiting to be inspected. He told them to craft 2 versions, one pricey beast with composite bow build plus pulleys for peak strength, and a cheaper one with a composite bow but 0 pulleys. He picked his design for one reason. History had already tested the crossbow, and it didn't always win. In Europe's 100 Years' War, the longbow outclassed it, while in Japan the crossbow faded into obscurity because their own bows dominated and early firearms showed up to steal the spotlight. All of that history lined up perfectly with what they were facing. Plus the neighboring Care Kingdom used bows too, but getting good demanded relentless training. And since a bunch of the Solis Baronese soldiers were just militia, you couldn't realistically expect them to grind through that brutal routine. He laid out his plan with laser focus. Hand a soldier crossbows, draw the string, then hit the trigger and let it fly. He stared at his work with pure satisfaction, because the 5th arrow was finally ready. Raymond, the steward, stepped in and confirmed not a single detail of its development had leaked out, then promised to take care of everything else. 2 days later, at the mercenary crew's temporary training grounds, a bright voice cut through the air, chirping a cheerful morning greeting to their master. Vice Schwarzfox spun around the moment the young master showed up, locking eyes as if the room had just exploded. He wasn't going anywhere alone. His brother Derek and the maid Eliza trailed right beside him. Cyrus wrestled a huge bundle wrapped in cloth, and Derek blurted out, "What are you hauling?" While he struggled, Eliza just stood there, quietly wishing she was the one getting stuck with that heavy load. As Cyrus the mercenary closed in, he told him he'd brought something just for his inspection. Then he leaned in again and said he wanted to hear what his brother and even the maid thought too. With a dramatic flourish, he tore the cover off the object. Boom, there it was. The weapon he'd designed, and Weiss leaned in, eyes locked on the device, genuinely intrigued. His brother snapped it was a crossbow at once, then pointed out the weird, offbeat shape. So Cyrus nodded and swore he'd designed it himself, mashing together ideas from a bunch of references, while the craftsman took care of all the tiny, make-it-perfect details. Cyrus clocked the mercenary's uneasy look, and yeah, he nailed it. Weiss already knew the real ups and downs of a crossbow, even if nobody in the Care Kingdom used one. With a bright grin, he leaned in and asked Weiss if she'd let him fire a shot, just so he could hear what the mercenary really thought. The mercenary snatched the weapon and his smile vanished. Serious focus locked in as he studied every detail. Then the mechanism snapped into place, and he started aiming at a distant target. He lined up the shot, and the new crossbow's string snapped taut in his hands. Right beside him, Cyrus and watched, holding their breath as a mercenary's razor-focused face pulled their attention tight. With a quiet little click, the bolt snapped into place, ready to rip loose the moment it's unleashed. The bolt screamed through the air at breakneck speed, smashed the wooden target on impact, and the weapon's raw power left Wise, Cyrus, and everyone nearby reeling in stunned silence for a heartbeat. Shaken to the core by that outcome, he burst into action and tore into Iran, racing straight for the rubble left of the target. He burst back to Cyrus, yanking him by the collar with frantic, wide-eyed urgency, and the mercenary snapped for another crossbow, swearing he'd outfit his whole mercenary crew with them if he could get his hands on one. The boy jolted back from the sudden heat, blurted an apology, and swore this was the only finished prototype. Because after hearing Weiss judge his performance, he'd been planning to show it to his father and propose it right away. Even with his jaw still dropping at how brutal the weapon's power was, the mercenary steadied himself and said, "With something like this, you could punch clean through the Graphonia Empire's iron cavalry, their toughest wall." Then he leaned in, hit Cyrus with a serious request. "Go talk to your father and get it bought." Derek, Cyrus' brother, begged him nonstop, furious that he wasn't allowed to try it, and Cyrus finally caved, reluctantly giving him a turn. He kept firing that crossbow shot after shot, fully locked in, like nothing else mattered, until Derek's nonstop target practice finally got stopped the moment something stepped in. The next day, in the courtyard of the Baron Soli's house, Cyrus stood face to face with his parents and their steward, Raymond. Then he bowed and thanked them, formally and sincerely, for every precious moment they'd given him. He stands face to face with his older brother, Derek, eyes blazing with excitement, and blurts out that, yeah, it's sudden. He's got something he needs Derek to see right this second. And with that, he thrusts the crossbow forward, eyes locked on his brother, full trust blazing, then tells him straight, "I'm handing this to Derek." In Baron Sala's courtyard, Cyrus grips a strange, rifle-like weapon and lines up his shot with deadly focus, staring straight at his older brother Derek as he tells him he's aiming one straight at him. A sharp crack tears through the air as the weapon blasts its projectile at insane speed, and Derek and Raymond, including him, can only stand there and stare, their faces locked in pure shock at that sudden, brutal discharge. The bolt hits dead center. Cyrus rockets his fist into the air and screams he nailed the bull's eye, but Derek's jaw drops so hard he can barely speak. He just stammers in pure disbelief at what he saw. Cyrus's eyes locked onto that strange weapon, and Dara leaned in, gaping at its weird shape and insane power, asking if he dreamed it up from his books. Cyrus admitted he did. He'd been testing whether the right materials could be forged into a bow, and then he revealed they'd gone to Weiss, who tested it and declared it strong enough to smash straight through the Graphonia Empire's legendary iron cavalry. Eric's face hardens as he lets out a sharp reprimand, booming that this is urgent and Cyrus should have come straight to him. His father. Right away. Cyrus glances away, sheepish, clearly taking the scolding. As Derek mulls over what this could mean, the weight of it settles in. Because this weapon could massively boost their territory, giving ordinary citizens the strength and know-how they've been missing. Off to the side, Raymond nods quietly, totally in sync. And when Cyrus, spoken to as Takiyasama, lifts his gaze again, you can see the renewed purpose hit him like a spark. He steps in and fires off a brutal question at the two brothers. Do they know why crossbows aren't everywhere? He underlines the crack in their armor. Reloading is slow, so crossbows can't match longbows when it comes to speed of fire. Cyrus and Derek stand shoulder to shoulder, faces set like stone. Derek swings it into motion. He's got a proposal to slam that problem straight on the table. Behind them, Smith watches as Derek declares the countdown is on. It's time to start prepping for the war that hits 1 year from now. Cyrus lays out their plan and pushes to start mass-producing the new weapon the second they can, so their forces won't be left waiting. Derek leans in, eyes locked on their worst nightmare, the Empire's iron cavalry, and he can already see it. If they strike with everything they've got, their territory gets crushed without mercy. He keeps talking, saying their arrows can't chew through the enemy's armor right now, but this new weapon will punch straight through steel, so even someone as small as him could knock down an armored knight. Cyrus then fires back with the real problem. They've only got about 400 soldiers, yet if they arm everyone with this, they could flip the whole war. That's why he insists they lock it down and keep it secret, before the enemy learns the trick. Derek nods and agrees. Derek, his brother, stared at the proposal with a serious face, admiring how incredible it could be to mass-produce this new weapon, but insisting they still had to boost how many people could actually use it, then throwing out the idea of training around 10% of the territory's population. He shot back with total confidence that rounding up about 800 archers wasn't some wild exaggeration. It was the real number. To make it happen, he made it clear. The archery range wouldn't be locked away for soldiers. It would open to everyone, free for the public, turning archery into a fun pastime people could actually enjoy. And on top of that, prizes were lined up too. Money, jewelry, and even swords. Derek spun toward their mother, demanding her take on Takar's wild plan. Before she could even speak, Takar blurted out his reasoning, saying they'd push themselves to master every skill just to chase prizes. And the more they played, the sharper they'd get, until that territory finally armed itself with a squad of top-tier archers. Brother stayed unconvinced, stroking his chin as he muttered whether anyone would actually buy into Cyrus's plan, while Cyrus just watched, wearing a smug, knowing smile. Derek reassured him, telling him he'd tried it the day before and loved every second. Then he swore that once he heard what came next in the proposal, most of his brother's worries would finally melt away. With one finger lifted, he launched into the system he called the sixth arrow, starting with the first move. Score the targets, because whoever hits the highest total by the end walks away with the prize. Then he laid out the next moves. First, host monthly and annual tournaments so everyone can put their skills on display. Second, splash out prize money to pull even more players in. And last, act as the bookmakers, letting people bet on who'll win, while the betting cash gets sliced to pay for the tournaments and the prizes. He spun toward his father, who'd come up beside him, and fired off his plan. Turn it into a full-on festival with the territory's citizens as the main stars. That way, the tournament would explode with energy and pull in even more spectators who'd compete or bet. Then he leaned in, grinning, and asked what his father thought with. With fire in his eyes, he swore this brilliant idea would turn the whole crowd into a deadly fighting force, powered by entertainment and rewards, and he promised this tournament would become the House of Silice's signature specialty. He kicked things off by answering Raymond's earlier question about crossbow's slower firing rate, and he insisted that how you use a weapon matters way more than the numbers on paper. He kept going, insisting that even if one volley loosed fewer arrows, they could still crush the iron cavalry by rotating a 3-row formation. One row fired, one row knocked and prepared, and one row set the next arrow, so the barrage never faltered, and he was sure that steady wall of death would smash through the charge. He drove the point home and reminded them that his brother Derek, brilliant with a sword, wasn't exactly a bow expert, yet after just one day of practice he was already nailing a distant target with a crossbow, and honestly that shock hit everyone. Then he snapped his gaze to his family and pointed toward the courtyard beyond, asking, couldn't it be incredible if every barony soldier could become that skilled? With a bright, carefree grin, he casually admitted he hadn't told Weiss about any of these plants yet, right as his father's face instantly fell into dark, angry silence. Cyrus and Derek stood shoulder to shoulder, trading a confident, knowing grin like they already knew what would happen next. From his spot, Raymond told his master that the boys had totally outsmarted him. Then the Baroness just drifted into her own head, staring at the massive price tag of it all, deciding to act like she never even heard that last part. The Baron, his master, stayed silent for a beat, eyes hard as he fixed his cravat, then snapped, "Raymond!" And the steward answered instantly. Then he fired off a string of orders to Raymond. Hit the workshop, push for crossbow mass production with no involvement from the police, and keep how the weapons get handed out hidden from everyone, even the soldiers. Training starts ASAP, and they're also setting up an archery range pronto. Raymond snapped back, got it. Then the Baron faced his sons head-on. Derek was ordered to dig into how the weapons performed on the battlefield, and the first rule was silence. To Cyrus, the Baron dubbed the car. He handed the job of drafting a report for the archery range and sketching a new betting system, while the tournament details stayed in his staff's hands. Both boys snapped to attention and eagerly took the commands like they'd been waiting for them. His father, the Baron, slams his final verdict down and cuts straight to it. The territory's funds will pay every single cent for the project. Right before the decision gets locked in, Cyrus blurts out a memory. Commander Weiss had been itching for a new crossbow. Then he fires off a proposal to his father, and you can see his dad leaning in, curious as hell. He lays out his plan. They'll hand Weiss's company the crossbows for free, but only if they keep it locked down in secrecy, use them for real monster fights, and send back detailed reports so they can sharpen and upgrade everything next time. A baron weighs the proposal and instantly lights up. It's a brilliant idea to him. Then he adds, "Once Weiss's men get truly skilled, they'll train my own troops too." Derek playfully scolds his younger brother for being sharp enough to exploit his own teacher and says, "Look how scheming you've become." Cyrus just grins and calls it a compliment, insisting he's always been this way, while quietly clocking that his father is watching. Then the Baron lays out a brutal, age-old problem. How do you turn ordinary citizens into a real fighting force? He warns that if they send soldiers to war, the garrison will be left wide open, perfect bait for bandits and monsters. He rages over how the Iron Cavalry keeps wiping them out, and insists they have to move now because the next war is coming fast. Derek hears it and whips around, telling everyone in the room to try out the brand new weapons. He's dead set on one idea: turn the people themselves into a real fighting force, then march to war with their land locked down, and even swell their numbers with fresh soldiers. Cyrus hears it all, and the look on his face screams, "Dad, you're a genius." That sharp strategy talk instantly turns into a real-life show. Everyone in the family, plus Raymond, takes turns blasting the crossbows. The Baroness lights up when she nails her target, then practically drags Raymond into the spotlight and yells that it's his turn. Meanwhile, the Baron and Cyrus stand there, watching in awe. He looks back on it and realizes something huge. Nothing beats the thrill of firing those crossbows. If doubt creeps in later, he'll shut it down with the memory of this successful, ridiculously entertaining demonstration. This moment lit the fuse for a near-future battlefield legend, when the Solis' forces would rise to terrifying fame through the Solis' archery. From that moment on, the brand new weapon the world just met would be known as Estelbal. He kicked off the whole production, then rode into the workshop town of ESD, where the clamor of industry burst out of the building as craftsmen shouted for materials, until one boot hit the wooden porch and a voice snapped, greeting him. Geld, the workshop manager, snapped his head toward the entrance, and recognition hit his face hard as he grinned at the young master. He pointed out that the shop had grown, and the number of workers had swelled too, while Saris, with Derek and another young boy at her side, watched and finally bowed her thanks for their visit. He whipped around to his employees and boomed that their honored guest had arrived, and every single craftsman froze mid-work, stood up, and bowed together. Then they erupted with greetings that shook the workshop walls. Cyrus, stunned by the whole ceremony, managed a shaky hello back. He snapped back into gear and looked Geld dead in the eye, telling the manager there was no need for all that formality. Yet Geld just laughed and said he couldn't possibly be that casual. Then Cyrus leaned in and dropped the real reason he'd come. He wanted to ask about the Estelbau and pick Cyrus's brain on some fresh designs. Geld's face sharpened, eyes lighting up like he'd just struck gold. Locking onto the manager's razor-sharp focus, he shot forward and decided to push his new project through. Then he barked for a guy named Carl, telling a stunned girl that this was urgent and that Carl could jump on it during his spare time. He yelled back, but this time he didn't let the request slide. He demanded Cyrus, work come first, hammering the point that every new job and burst of prosperity came straight from the young master's ideas, just like with the water wheel, and Cyrus sat there listening while his companions nodded along. To get this sorted, Geld ushered them off the main workshop floor and into a back room jammed with tools and lumber, promising they could talk in private there. Derek smiled because no one else was around. Then Cyrus was finally asked what new creation he wanted to build this time. With a sharp breath, Cyrus slammed a giant sheet of paper onto the workbench, and Geld and Carl leaned in like they couldn't look away, because he was unveiling his draft for the new invention he'd been cooking up. The blueprint spelled out a wild contraption, parallel bars locked inside a frame, wired to levers and other parts, and one of the craftsmen stabbed a finger at a specific section, demanding, "Wait, what exactly is this?" He tells Geld the new device is a rapid-fire crossbow, and even though he's not exactly rushing to finish it, he insists they must keep pushing the standard crossbows and the Estel bows first. Geld nods, fully getting it. Jabbing the blueprint, he breaks down the whole mechanism, how a magazine traps a bundle of arrows, and with every lever snapped back and forth, the weapon would load and fire on its own. Carl leans in, locked on every word. He lets it slip. This weapon is the Zhuge crossbow, and he can't help thinking it was supposedly cooked up by the genius strategist Zhuge Liang. Whether it's true history or just a legend people kept passing down doesn't matter anymore. He remembers seeing it in videos from his past life, and admits this project is mostly for his own obsession. But that doesn't stop him from pushing a weapon forward faster than a bow, even if it won't match a machine gun's speed. Derek's hooked, and he presses him on the metal piece needed to latch the string. A craftsman is already buried in thought, and Geld snaps that a curved axis will wobble the second he fires, while Carl argues they should double up another part. With impatience burning, Geld demands tools and arrows, and Cyrus lunges to stop. He snaps them back to the real mission. Those weapons they're already commissioned to build come first, and then he orders them to keep this brand new design under lock and key, a total secret. With their tools already in hand, Carl and Gelb grin like they mean business, and they insist Cyrus hand it over to them. So Cyrus just stands there, stunned for a split second by their wild confidence. After touring the Estalbau production area with his brother and their companion, Cyrus caught his breath and noticed everything was leveling up. Wooden pieces were getting swapped for metal, and the work got split between different craftsmen so it delast and churn out fast enough for mass production. If things keep rolling like this, he's convinced they'll scrape together the absolute bare minimum for the border war next year. Relief hit him hard when he realized that, just after his visit, the first mass-produced bows were already finished. And turns out Weiss had gone straight to his father the very next day after seeing the crossbow, locking down the exact supplies his mercenary crew needed. The mercenaries didn't just keep using the Estel bows and sending back intel. They started drilling a 3-row volley plan too, exactly like his father demanded. In the original history, the war due to kick off next year was a small-scale showdown led by 2 marquises. But it still wrecked the Solis barony, wiping out 40% of its army, and now a huge twist has completely changed how the story was supposed to go. These changes hit hard for a few big reasons. The Estel bows shoot straight at the enemy's main threat, the Iron Cavalry, boosting the archer ranks like crazy, bringing in the 2-headed Falcon mercenaries under the invincible General Weiss, and giving them a full historical record that spells out how the Care Kingdom's forces finally crumbled. Even with all those perks, Cyrus couldn't shake the worry. Something about the Allies, the Gorman Viscountcy, felt wrong, like they'd betray them the moment it counted. That sharp dread hit him hard, so he decided they needed another car in reserve, backup for victory no matter what. One day, while Cyrus sat outside with his brother Derek clocked that troubled look on his face and demanded to know what was wrong. So Cyrus spilled his worries about his magic, especially his light magic, and how rare it is in the Care Kingdom, while Derek confirmed he wasn't wrong. Cyrus was drowning in his own thoughts, so he clutched his hands together and begged his brother to hear him out. When Derek blinked in surprise, he still gave a calm nod and told him, "Go on." He finally spilled the truth about his torment. His light magic was failing, right when he needed it most. Derek's eyes flew open with pure shock as he demanded to know if Cyrus was really telling the truth. Cyrus nodded and said he wouldn't be this crushed if things were normal, so Derek realized how serious it was, then urged them to run to their father, and that idea lit a spark in Cyrus' head. A wild idea snapped into his head. This could work. He blurted out right then. Derek, the ultimate realist, cut in fast. They needed to see their father first, and yeah, he'd bet they'd get scolded again. His mind sprinted with fresh, deadly confidence. This plan he cooked up would create a brand new kind of killer, so unfamiliar the enemy wouldn't know how to stop it. And with that in hand, he was sure they could finally beat the Empire's feared Iron Cavalry right as war was about to be officially announced. Baron Solis' story is a string of ruinous warnings. Then everything falls apart in the Care calendar, year 502. The Marquis Gallagherphonia Empire storms the Care Kingdom. Marquis Hasburg rallies the neighboring nobles to stop them, but Baron Solis' forces get cut off and hemorrhage 40% of their troops. They still dig in, hold their ground, and stop the invasion, but the Imperial Army's spirits stay razor-sharp. Both sides shout victory, yet the border is soaked in the kingdom's blood, a brutal loss that leaves the citizens of Estonia mourning. History sits heavy on every breath. Then, on one sweltering summer day, a messenger from R.C. Hasselberg storms into Estal, crashing straight through the household's peace. He slammed out his urgent message. Graphonia Empire was plotting another invasion. The command was crystal clear. Rally the troops at the southern gate fort and wipe out the enemy on the southern plains. Young Solis von Tiker stared on, eyes blown wide with pure shock. They headed straight for the southern gate plains, an open battleground right on the Demon Realm's doorstep, where the Baron had to lead with no more than his rank should allow, commanding 200 extra men. The Viscount wasn't coming with his full 600, but what they had was still plenty to protect their honor, so police watched the soldiers march out through the main gate, gripping their spot beside the rest of his family as they stayed behind. The shock on his mother's face, Josette, eyes locked as they marched away, while he stood nearby, completely still, watching the solemn procession unfold at. So after choking down all that self-torture training, he finally stops, alone, brooding as time crawls by. Then he realizes it has to be right about now when his father and the rest are closing in on the battlefield. Back when he was just 9, he begged to join the army, only to have them slam the door in his face. His parents' words keep crashing through his head. His father warned him the battlefield wasn't for kids, and his mother softly told him it wasn't as simple as he'd been dreaming. Lynch clenched his fist and swore to himself he wasn't naive, because he understands exactly how brutal fighting really is, and that truth has been driving him to get stronger nonstop. He can't stop replaying it. If everything follows the same history he knows, his family's army is going to get crushed, losing 40% of its fighting strength. But he refuses to fold. This time, things will be different. The Solis Baron's army has new advantages, ones they never had in the past. He fretted that his father, the Baron, was way too sure of his plans, because the man trusted his preparations, and swore their elite troops could survive any setback thanks to the invincible General Weiss. And to make it worse, he'd even sat down with the generals to hash out the Iron Cavalry's tactics and the counters they might face. His confidence didn't come out of nowhere. It hit after he reshaped the Solis Baronese army. He wiped out the old official archer role and armed every single soldier, even the cavalry, with an Estel bow so deadly anyone could use it, conscripts included, no real skill needed. Then he boosted the cavalry ranks like crazy, thanks to a move his father pulled 2 years earlier when grain prices suddenly spiked. While other territories crumbled under famine, slaughtering their own horses or selling them off for scraps, the Baron struck first, grabbing a mountain of horses, especially the ones built for war, all under the sweet-sounding lie that he needed them to evacuate the people from their settlements. The results were massive. Those cavalry ranks that once crawled under 100 now surged past 200, boosted by mercenaries. And because of their contract, the two-headed Falcon mercenary crew got first pick on the new war horses. With that steady supply, more and more regular soldiers were shoved into cavalry ranks. Back at the estate, Cyrus sat alone, gripping a wooden sword so hard his knuckles ached, because this time he'd done everything he could. As a kid, all he'd ever managed was to hide and wait for good news, and that helplessness still burned him. So he shut his eyes and prayed with everything he had, begging them to survive the fourth calamity. As he prayed, his mother hovered close, her face heavy as a single feather floated by, and Cyrus lifted his eyes, his quiet plea still burning, begging that they'd somehow make it through. She tipped her head back to the sky, watched 2 birds ride the wind like nothing could touch them, and right when that unspoken prayer finally faded, this try. Derek's attention snapped to the southern gate's open plains near the border, where, on the far right wing of the Kyre Kingdom forces, he sat armored as a commander in the Solis Cornell Barony alliance, and one of the troops shouted his name. Weiss stepped in to tell them, "All done, we built this encampment with Earthmage's Baron Cornell lent us." The trenches were dug, the traps were laid, and Derek just nodded, "Good work." Weiss pushed for a straight answer on a rumor that the Empire's invasion was sparked by a broken line of succession, and Derek nodded, saying it was pure desperation from the First Prince's faction, since the prince had nothing to show for himself. That's why the First Prince never showed up, only Marquis Guy stood in his place. Derek paused, then nodded as Weiss demanded his read on their odds, admitting things weren't perfect, but at least it had blown up trouble for everyone else. He kicked off his analysis by pointing out that the enemy's army was basically the same size, about 7,000 soldiers on each side. The Graphonia Empire, led by Mark, after laying their hands on the control, set their forces into a crane-wing formation, a brutal offense meant to wrap around Derek and snatch him mid-move. Derek stared at the plan and admitted the basics were solid, but the danger crawling off it felt absolutely terrifying. When they pressed Derek on what he meant, he snapped back that the enemy might not play by the rules, and Marquis Hasseberg, the commander of the Care Kingdom's main force, agreed, warning that their foes could be looking everywhere but his central army. He broke down the flaw in one sharp breath. Allied commanders had seized the high ground, locking the enemy into a stretched-out spread, tearing open massive gaps between their wings and ripping away the formation's power. His eyes sharpened with total certainty. He knew the enemy was counting on those openings, and he'd strike next with one brutal push at either the left or the right flank to crush them piece by piece. If they pulled that off, it would be catastrophic. Wipe out a wing, then smash straight through the opening and hit Hasseberg's central army from the sides or even the back. And if they pushed hard enough, they'd punch through the line, seal every escape route, and trap them completely. Weiss leaned in, hanging on every word, while Derek's grim voice cut through the air. If that happened, he said, it would be the end of their entire army. Then he kept going, because their formation carried a deadly flaw. They'd wrapped themselves in a giant circle, and since their numbers were exactly equal to the enemy's, they got stretched so thin that the opponent could smash right through, while their own allies struggled to back each other up. He pointed to their right wing, where Viscount Gorman and Viscount Hieramus commanded the forces. He let out a heavy sigh and told Weiss that everyone was eyeing everyone else like a threat. Turnip started it, the refugee mess fed it, and from day one they'd been fighting for the wrong side of the truth. He studied the map of their forces and spotted a nasty catch. The very allies they counted on could turn dangerous, and if the enemy slammed the right wing, their whole combined army would get cut off fast and slaughtered. Weiss stewed over the worst possible outcome. If those two Viscounts wanted revenge right in this battle, all they'd have to do is yank their defenses back a hair and trap the Alliance forces completely. He admitted the whole situation was dead serious, and Derek warned that the enemy almost certainly had already figured out a way to exploit that exact weakness. Their main threat was Marquis and God's Iron Cavalry, riding in with unshakable confidence and a straight-up frontal charge at them. That was basically suicide. Smur snapped across Derek's face, real damage, no doubt. Then he struck back immediately, and if they tried to charge them straight from the front. He told them there was a crack in the defenses they could exploit, one master plan that could flip the whole battle around. Then they laid out their own forces in detail. Baron Cornell's troops backing them up, masters of constructs, with all 400 soldiers armed with Estel bows, and half that army riding in as cavalry. With their banners snapping in the wind, their entire plan finally came into clear view. Derek threw in one last game-changer. They'd already set up a hidden ace, plus a secret strategy nobody saw coming. He kept driving the plan forward, laying out every move and pointing out that the enemy's left wing was commanded by the famously fearless Viscount Silius. Derek leaned in, confident that their current setup gave them solid odds, especially with a surprise tactic so wild even their own allies wouldn't see it coming. Hearing that, a cocky smirk cracked across Weiss's face, and he nodded like, "Yeah, that move will flip this whole battle on its head." We let out a little dismissive scoff, and Derek snapped his eyes at us like, "Wait, what?" Then the mercenary leaned in and declared that naming him an advisor was the obvious right move, claiming he'd heard Derek's two sons had pushed for it, and that Takir especially wouldn't let it go. Right then, Derek angled his head, let the info sink in, and kept moving. Then he shot a knowing smile over his shoulder, confessing that this whole move had been his plan since day one, and he even said it was an honor to serve. With the plan locked in, Weiss snapped her eyes to the horizon, bracing for the enemy's push. And she could feel it. The moment they strike was almost here. Right on cue, Derek shot his arm up and roared an earth-shaking order to every soldier. "Get ready, battle is coming, and what happens next will be remembered forever as the Southern Gate Annihilation War." In the Graphonia Empire HQ, Marquis God leans in, eyes locked on the enemy with a smug confidence, watching the Care Kingdom march into the exact formation he predicted, and snorting that they don't even get why his army threw them the high ground. Scoffs at the whole thing, saying their predictability is just a selfish survival instinct, always grabbing the defensive edge of the higher ground, like they can't think past themselves. The horse slams its hoof down, and right then, he starts barking the battle plan they cooked up. His men will pin the center and the right wing, while their left wing surges forward to completely crush and overtake the enemy's right flank. Sword raised to the sky, he barks his final orders. Iron Cavalry, stay back, hold the line, and wait for the opening. Then, with a thunderclap of a command, he unleashes the charge. The battlefield explodes into a raging storm of violence as both armies crash together. Cornell Barony's forces and Viscount Hierame's men get slammed into the chaos. In the middle of the clash, a commander stays ice calm, sizes everything up at once, says it's going exactly as planned, then orders his troops to brace for a long-range volley. Vice Schwarzfach, the commander, barks out ruthless orders. Each shooter gets a number, takes their exact position, and stays locked in, firing nothing until the signal screams for attack. He settles into his position and watches their tactics, because they've clocked the Solis Cornell Alliance's right wing is weak. So they stack the odds to pin the center and left with archers, then smash the right flank with overwhelming numbers before tearing the rest of the army apart piece by piece. The battle map shouts his analysis is right, so the enemy plans to smash the two Viscounts' front lines, then slam their Iron Cavalry in from the right to crush the main force, just like he predicted. Grimly, he faces the truth. Out here on the battlefield, it's numbers that decide everything. Over 2,000 enemy soldiers have their sights set on the right wing, a tidal wave even for the combined armies of Viscount Gorman and Hirami. And to make it worse, their morale is hanging by a thread. He stood beside Baron Cornell on the ramparts, staring down the chaos as it swallowed the kingdom. Baron Cornell's face set in stone as he muttered that the collapse was only a countdown, and Weiss nodded along, grim and helpless. Down on the battlefield, Viscount Hirami's soldiers were getting slaughtered, one after another, as cries of panic tore through the air, drowning in the chaos of enemy numbers so vast they could barely breathe. They wailed that no one had ordered a retreat, yelling they'd hit their breaking point and couldn't take another step. Commander Viscount Hirami clenched his teeth on horseback, raging with helpless fury as he watched the slaughter unfold before him. At the Graphonia Empire's main headquarters, and the whole scene was soaked in icy satisfaction. An officer even pointed out how effortlessly one of the enemy lines crumbled. Marquis Gott nodded along as an officer fired off the news. Turns out the enemy hadn't even wiped out half his forces yet, and Gott smirked, because the other enemy group looked like it was still getting clobbered, clinging on with pure stubborn grit. That stubbornness traced straight back to Viscount Gorman's army. Gorman himself snarled in rage, cursing Hirami as a coward's whim, and then Marquis fired off a brutal order. Surround them and crush every last one of those stubborn bastards. Marquis Haspard studied the chaos with razor-sharp caution, realizing they'd be crushed if they kept this pace, by the remaining 2,000 soldiers. So he snapped orders. Hold the line, fall back in a slow, calculated retreat, and drive his men to affirm the new command fast. News of the battlefield shift tore straight into the Solis Cornell Barony alliance. Then a messenger snapped the worst report. Viscount Hirami's line had shattered completely, and Viscount Gorman was falling back too. Baron Cornell just stood there, silent and razor-focused, absorbing every word. Once it was settled that this was the outcome they'd all expected, Baron Cornell swung his attention to Weiss and told her it was go time to start. Weiss just nodded, ready to jump in. And with his nod, it was settled. Elsewhere, a young guy with a blonde ponytail stood there, waiting for the last word, ready to fire off the signal the moment he was told. The pages of history flip to a fresh start, gilded and bright, as a rush of massive events starts to loom just ahead. Far from the chaos of the battlefield, inside a calm-looking academy, a young woman with long, light hair and a young man in a crisp, formal uniform stand at a window, staring out with serious, deep-in-thought faces. While all of this unfolds, the architects brace for what's coming, Schwarzfox's eyes cutting sharp, and Marquis Hasberg and Marquis Gott looking grim and locked in, and then the fourth commander flashes a furious grin and says it's finally time. This is where history truly ignites. In the Graphonia Empire's HQ, the Marquis erupted in hearty laughs, soaking up every second, praising his commander's genius, sneering at the enemy's pathetic nerves, and declaring it was finally time to end them for good. He clenched his gauntlet, drew a deep breath, and roared for the Iron Cavalry. He slams out his orders. Wipe out the enemy's right wing, smash through from behind, and bring back the head of their top man. Then Darren, his subordinate, points at the battlefield and snaps that the lone army on the far right wing is the first target. The plan snaps into motion, and the Marquis erupts with savage fury, roaring orders for his forces to wipe every single one of them out. The Iron Cavalry slams into the field and blasts a shockwave through the enemy ranks. Cyrus feels the whole fight flip in an instant. He knows they're on the real battlefield now, and that means trouble. His own soldiers freak out, terrified that if the center reinforcements shift, the enemy will punch straight through and march right toward their Marquis. As the chaos swelled, a soldier snapped toward his commander, Darren, begging, desperate, for orders. But he stays silent. Right beside it, another commander, dark hair, glasses, watches everything unfold with a calm, unreadable face while his troops fidget anxiously behind him. Others hesitate. Cyrus strides forward, remembering how his father stood right here again and again, and he snaps into command, ordering everyone to make sure their arrows are loaded and to get ready for a volley. He barks one strict rule: they don't fire until they hear the command snaps through the air. Yes, and the archers yank their bows back, ready to loose. Cyrus locks eyes on the enemy charging forward because this is when the signal has to hit. Right as he's about to bark the order, his eyes snap to a man on a nearby ridge. Derek. Cyrus reels in shock at his brother's sudden presence, and the soldiers immediately realize this situation is way too deadly to handle. From where Derek stands, he barks the order straight to his troops, and at his signal they lock on and blast straight for the front of the enemy lines. He stood frozen on the battlefield, his heart thundering in his ears, and even with everyone watching, that creepy silence swallowed the chaos whole. Cyrus, the younger brother, spoke with calm confidence, telling Derek to chill, because they already knew they were going to win. Even after the reassurance, Derek's gauntlet hand snapped into a tight fist, and the truth hit him hard. He was terrified. That terror hit, but something in him snapped into place. A shaky, determined smile crept onto his lips as his fear hardened into pure purpose. He shot his hand up to signal something. While Cyrus watched, Derek's eyes hardened, and you could tell he'd already made up his mind. At that exact moment, Cyrus's voice snapped through the tension. He yelled for him to hit the second objective off to the right. Derek roared, "Yes," and slammed aside his doubt as he finally chose to believe. He swore he'd trust himself, and he'd make sure his little brother believed too. Reality lurched. Everything rewound to a few tense months before the war finally erupted. In that past moment, a younger Derek snapped with bitter frustration. He swore his light power couldn't seriously hurt a soul, and all it ever did was blind someone for a brief second. He unloaded all his frustration on Cyrus, wishing he could use something deadly like fire or lightning instead of these weak little tricks. Because as a swordsman, he felt sick relying on cheap magic, and all he had was light, which he swore was totally useless. Cyrus just listened in silence, eyes locked on his brother like he was weighing every word. He leaned into his brother and demanded what throw light even meant. Derek sulked through it, saying it was all he had, then agreed to prove it. He thrust his hand forward, and a blazing orb of light sparked into existence above his palm. The glow snapped across his face, and his eyes bulged with awe. He burst out that it was amazing, leaving Derek completely baffled. Derek could only stammer back, insisting it was nothing more than a little bit of light. Cyrus, brother's simple answer didn't slow his excitement one bit. He practically shouted at Derek that he'd just uncovered an incredible magic skill, then seized his confused brother and dragged him straight to their father to report what they found. The very next day, their argument picked up again at the training grounds on the edge of EST. Then a voice cut in and said, "Yeah, I see." Right there, Cyrus practically begged Derek to put his master, Weiss, to the test. Show her what he could do, and show her now. Even with his hesitation, Derek finally nodded and agreed. Right before he tried casting again, he clocked how amped Cyrus was, and the idea hit him. Talking to a real master like Weiss might turn his basic light magic into something way more wild. So he raised his hands and summoned the light once more. As he stared at that hovering orb of light, he leaned in and fired a tactical question at Derek. What would happen if they pointed that beam at a line of galloping horses? A question snapped through the air. Weiss watched with a smug, knowing smirk while Derek stared it down like he finally got it, then asked straight up if Cyrus was really hinting at using this on a battlefield. With a confident grin, he nodded along and confirmed it, then laid out the nightmare in plain words. If a cavalry unit comes screaming forward at full speed and suddenly can't see, the panic and wreckage would be beyond imagination, and that's the truth, he finished. And just like that, everything clicked for Derek. He finally got why Cyrus thought the way he did, and he saw it. His light magic wasn't just talent, it was a battlefield weapon waiting to be unleashed. That's when the real training kicked in, as he pushed himself to hurl light farther and land it with razor-precise accuracy, all while Weiss hovered close, watching with a bemused look that said she couldn't believe he was actually taking it seriously. Mages are wildly valuable for one brutal reason. They're rare. The kingdom and the empire have only a handful, and the ones that exist are usually nobles with bloodline magic who never step onto the front lines, so armies barely plan for them, if at all. And when a mage finally shows up on the battlefield, it hits like a surprise weapon that nobody prepared to stop. With a strained look on his face, he turned to his younger brother, and Derek shot back. So this is the heart of it. Because the same rule would hit even harder for him with his insanely rare light magic. Then the memory snaps to a new time, another conversation, until his father drops one cold, unshakable line. He won't be allowed to join the military. In that moment, a younger Derek faced his parents, arms flung wide in pure disbelief, and demanded to know why they refused. His father sat down and met his gaze, then calmly told him the truth. The day he'd step onto the battlefield was coming, but right now it was still way too soon. Cyrus snapped up and refused to stay quiet. He insisted he'd already laid out how Derek's light magic would shred the Empire's iron cavalry. Derek froze from the sudden outburst, then moved to hush his brother. At that moment, their mother dropped to her knees, gripping Derek's hands tight, and begged him, telling him he was only 12 and that she couldn't stomach the idea of him stepping into a place this dangerous. Her raw emotional plea slammed into Cyrus, leaving him utterly speechless. He just stared, breathing out a whisper of the word. But the father didn't budge. He snapped to his wife, Karisu, by name, told her it was enough, and warned that caving to a child's stubbornness would only drag trouble in. That last remark snapped Cyrus's control in half. He erupted on the spot, voice blazing with defiance, screaming that his father was wrong and leaving the whole room stunned. That outburst still hangs there, but everything pivots back to Derek's years-old emotions, starting as something simple, pure envy of his younger brother and nothing to cure. Rage burned in his chest, because no matter what the older brother, he was never the one getting the praise. It was always Kier, and the whole world seemed to spin around him. A strange feeling started to twist in his chest. Then, the closer Derek watched, the clearer it got. Takir fought to swallow his food right, buried himself in books long after midnight, and wiped sweat off his brow after every brutal attempt. Derek finally understood how badly his brother was trying. He couldn't help wondering why his brother was grinding so hard, so he peeked from behind the doorway, watched him study, and suddenly his envy turned into questions about himself. That question kept pounding in his head, crushing him with pure frustration, tears flooding his face as he slumped against the doorframe, torn up by feelings he couldn't make peace with. That same fury now drives him in the present as he stands before his family and insists his desire to join the fight isn't just stubbornness or show. It's purpose, plain and true. He shoves aside his fear and speaks with raw, desperate conviction. His voice booms through the air, and the pain from his past turns into one burning promise. When he sees his beloved family flash in his mind, he vows he'll protect everyone too, and then a blazing light explodes from his outstretched hand. Right as the declaration hits, a blinding flash detonates across the battlefield. Weiss, Marquis Hasberg, and all their allies get slammed by it, eyes burning, hands up, shouting in pure shock and confusion. A blinding flash detonates across the battlefield, and the enemy lines collapse into wild panic. Soldiers shriek as their terrified horses rear up, buck, and bolt, and the whole advance jerks to a sudden, chaotic stop. That blinding flash detonated through the enemy cavalry, shattering their lines into chaos. One charged soldier staggered, stunned for a beat, and blurted out, "What is that light? Where's it coming from?" The soldier's sudden blindness turned the world into chaos. He and his mount couldn't spot the ground ahead, so they crashed straight into a hidden trench, shattering their momentum the instant it caught them. Watching the chaos from afar, Schwarzfach clocked why the plan worked. Those little bumps and shallow trenches are laughable on a clear day, but once a rider goes blind, they turn into a brutal wall nobody can slip past. Derek's plan hit like a bullseye. Down on the field, he stood surrounded by the soldiers he'd just pulled out, their cheers slamming through the air as he savored every moment. They shouted about how they'd lived, how the enemy's iron cavalry crumpled again and again, and how they couldn't stop praising him by name. The message practically flew straight into Marquis Hasper's command. Then a rider thundered up to him and blurted that the iron cavalry got shut down, and that Baron Solis somehow had this backup plan ready. The Marquis leaned in, eyes narrowing with a thoughtful, almost amused look as he took in the wild twist that just hit. Somewhere else on the battlefield, Viscount Hirame stared at everything with stone-cold silence, his face impossible to read. The news didn't land calmly in Marquis God's camp. One soldier rushed in and said their mighty iron cavalry had taken a brutal hit, with a full third of the force suddenly knocked out. Marquis God's fists tightened, fury blazing, and he snapped at the messenger to stop the trembling lies. Cyrus never heard his rage. He just stared from a distance at his younger brother, and pride hit his eyes hard as he nodded at Derek's win, praising him like, "You did very well." Derek didn't care about his brother's approval. His eyes locked onto his mentor, Weiss Schwarzfach. He stammered and begged for his master's blessing, but Weiss cut through it with a calm, simple, "Derek." He steps forward, his armored boots thudding against the ground, and throws the boy a simple nod that hits like a blessing. "Great work." He snaps his gaze to the rest of the enemy and orders Derek to handle them while he takes the lead. Derek looks up, figures out only about 2/3 are still standing, and realizes they've got to rush, make the next move, then set everyone up for brutal long-range suppressive fire. With raw resolve, he clenches his fists. This is Derek, the eldest son of the Baron Solis family, a kid born to become a sword saint, the legendary swordsman of all life. His first battle erupted in that blazing flash of light, so fierce it sparked resentment and left the Empire's forces humiliated, battered even before they could land a real fight. Down on the field, Cyrus tilts his head up, relief glowing across his face. He's done what he can, now he turns inward, silently calling on his resolve for Carr.